Chapter 1. Reborn. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Wandering through realities, the existence beyond space and time searched for an interesting soul. The being had witnessed the birth and demise of countless universes, experiencing all that life had to offer, and now finally desired to pass on. Not wanting to disappear without leaving anything behind, they aimed to leave a final gift and, in the process, have one last entertaining story to watch. While in between realities, they noticed something shocking. A mortal soul, just casually drifting in what was essentially the harshest environment possibly found. This was it. This was what they'd been looking for. Not expecting to find such a resilient soul, the omnipotent being reflected on their beginning. Having begun as nothing but an average mortal, their essence could never quite be infinite, leading to their current disinterest in further existence. Observing this soul, tempered in the void for longer than even they could comprehend, the being entertained the notion that they might be able to assist in crafting an existence beyond anything witnessed before. Gathering up all but a small drop of their essence, the being infused a few powers that would set the odd soul on a path to unknown heights before shunting it off toward a place where it could grow. At the end of the day, the now weakened omnipotent being was still searching for entertainment, so they wouldn't be bestowing instant near limitless power. Now, using the last of their essence, they simply sat back, eagerly anticipating an interesting show. A new god's conquest. He was dead. It didn't take him long to realize this, floating around as a disembodied soul. It didn't seem to be one of the promised afterlives. It was probably for the better, considering he might otherwise be enduring torture at the hands of a demon or something similar, given he wasn't much of a believer. Still, this was a place he seriously shouldn't have ended up in. Weird shit just always seemed to happen. Parts of his mind would experience vastly different perceptions of time. He could be calmly drifting along, but suddenly, it's like he just got thrown into a dimensional blender. But worst of all, it was the boredom. He was so fucking bored. Sure, he had memories of his time on Earth, but even those were kind of spotty. The only memories that were crystal clear were the vast amounts of entertainment he'd consumed. Movies, television series, books, manga, and even scraping the bottom of the barrel with fanfiction. He wondered what that said about his current personality. How does the morality of someone who mainly relies on media as their past experiences look to an outsider? Maybe it's because of this, but those thoughts didn't bother him at all. Getting back to the point, the only thing that's currently bothering him is this fucking boredom. No matter how long he's been here, it always comes back to this, monologuing about his existence and how he got here. Feeling the sensation of an outside force acting upon his being, he wondered if his ability to monologue had transcended space and time, gaining the power of reality warping. A new god's conquest. Blinking his eyes at the all-white room he somehow found himself in. Wait, that didn't feel right. Looking down and finding himself as some sort of incorporeal blob, he understood why he was feeling so off. He had no eyelids to blink. He couldn't even understand how he could see himself completely in this weird point of view that was beyond explanation. Ah, fuck it, at least something's happening, instead of continuing to lose his mind in the void. Now that he had decided to just go with the flow of whatever was happening here, he finally noticed the one thing about the blank room that stood out from the rest: a single conspicuous vial on an equally white table. Taking the hint, he walked up to the table. Well, no reason to back down now, he thought, looking at the swirling golden cosmos of a liquid before quickly downing the mystery potion. Essence of creation. Through your actions, you gain essence. You can create anything from personal skills and abilities to mythical items with this stored essence. Aside from the essence required for creation, there is no limit to what you can do. You've been gifted with a starting essence based on your achievements made so far. The information of what he'd consumed immediately entered his mind after swallowing the liquid. Sure, the ability's description was pretty vague, but he couldn't stop himself from bursting out into maniacal laughter. Which was weird because he had no mouth to laugh from. Was this it? Was this the chance for his dreams of becoming a necromancer to come true? Leading hordes of undying, loyal minions into glorious battle, conquering countless dimensions, and ruling as a god emperor. Okay, maybe he did go a little insane in the void, but fuck it, who wouldn't have dreams of conquest after receiving such a power? After reveling in thoughts of domination for a few minutes longer, he came back to reality. He knew this all sounded like a setup by whatever omnipotent being sent him there to get him to interact with whatever world he'd be sent to, but it really didn't bother him much. He knew his personality, and it wasn't one for being a side character. On top of that, now that he knew higher beings with enough power to give him this overpowered ability existed, he was more determined than ever to reach those heights one day. Preferably, he'd even surpass that and end up as the one at the very top, but that was for the far future. Just because he wanted to surpass the ability he was freely given didn't mean he wouldn't use the power to its utmost. No, he would use it as a stepping stone to achieve an even greater potential. For now, he was simply wondering what type of world he'd end up with and what his first creation would be. The use of the word essence made him think of the overpowered abilities used in many fanfictions he'd read, but he'd never heard of the one he'd just received. He didn't know what he had achieved in the past to warrant it, but he felt that his current reserves of essence were enough to give him a significant power boost. It wouldn't be enough to create another of the overpowered essences he'd read about, but maybe a weaker or nerfed version would work. First, he'd wait to find out what kind of world he was being sent to before making any hasty decisions. After getting himself together, this was a lot to take in. After all, the silhouette of a door made itself known on the wall next to the table. Opening the door to find nothing but the swirling vortex, he shrugged before jumping into the abyss. Whoever got him here presumably wouldn't just send him to his death right away. A new god's conquest. After waking up in a dark cave with no exit in sight, he sighed at the information that was perfectly categorized in the body he now inhabited. Aside from the decayed skeletons, too numerous to count, there was only a large, ominous archway in the cave. But this wasn't what caused his sigh. No, this was mundane in comparison. He was Lux, apparently the son of the biblical god, and the primordial personification of darkness, Erebus. If it weren't for the overpowered essence he'd received, he'd likely be pacing around, tearing his hair out from the information that Big G put in his head. In short, his father was the god from the DC universe, also known as the Presence. Luckily, at the moment, he was far, far away from that death verse. But it wasn't that simple. No, that would be too easy. It seemed like he was self-inserted into some weird fanfiction because the memories he had also contained elements of high school DxD. From what he knew, before the Great War that led to the events in high school DxD, a threat from beyond the Omniverse required the Presence to use the majority of his power, along with that of his archangels, including Lucifer, to hold back the invasion. His remaining power was used to ensure the DC multiverse wouldn't fall into complete chaos. Now comes the part where he was born, or however new gods are created. After years of gathering what little power he could, God decided he needed a permanent solution for the threat they were facing. And thus, with the help of the Child of Chaos, he came to be. Lux knew that in mythology, Erebus was depicted as a male, but he also figured that a primordial being wouldn't be locked to a single gender. Or who knew, maybe Big G swung the other way. He wouldn't judge. In fact, he felt it was pretty woke of his old man. He sighed again, deciding he could put thoughts of beyond-dimensional invaders aside for the moment. He might as well take up the identity of this body. Lux was a good enough name, anyway. There was also the fact that, like it or not, he was a part of this Omniverse and he wouldn't let his second chance at life be ruined. At the very least, his father hadn't just yeeted his son off with nothing. On top of the essence he received from the being that must be beyond that of the Presence and likely of the invaders, his estranged father had also given him a few useful boons. He was given information on the basics of light and mind magic that supernaturals used to keep themselves hidden. Lux wondered if God wanted him to work for his power or something because he was sure he could have been given knowledge of even greater magic. But whatever. Lux had also been made into an angel. For now, he had only a measly single pair of wings, but he knew that his potential would allow him to surpass the archangels if he survived long enough. Whatever type of angel he'd been made into was free from the restrictions that caused them to fall. He knew that without this, his wings would have already become pitch black. Just because he was turned into an angel and was the son of God didn't mean he would become a saint all of a sudden. After all, omniversal conquest was still on his to-do list. And the final gift was one of his father's favorite toys, a sacred gear. He didn't know what it was, but he figured now was as good a time as any to check it out. Finding the thing he felt was forever tied to his soul, Lux pulled on the connection before two little dogs, one pitch black and the other metallic gold, each holding a similarly colored blade in their mouths. These little guys were too familiar. Did his father create multiple versions of the Longinus, Canis Lycaon? Whatever, none of that mattered at the moment, he had head scritches to give. Hey there little guys, he cooed, going for head pats, only to get two growls of irritation, and through their bond, he knew why. Okay, you two are beautiful little girls, aren't you? He corrected himself, the little dogs nodding their heads in approval. You two need a name, don't you? How about Noir and Aurora? He asked while running a hand through the puppies' soft fur. Receiving no complaints as the little girls melted into his ministrations, he figured they too were pleased with the names. After a while of playing with his new companions, Lux realized something. He hadn't even seen what his new body looked like yet. Conjuring a light mirror, a skill that was beyond simple even with the little knowledge of magic he'd been given, he froze for a second at the sight. Damn, he was attractive. A perfect mixture of masculine and feminine beauty. Flawless, light caramel skin, hair as black as darkness itself, with golden highlights scattered throughout that flowed down to the middle of his back. His black eyes, speckled with gold, and a perfectly symmetrical face created an image he thought was almost too mesmerizing. But all of that paled in comparison to the majestic pair of wings on his back, primarily gold with a few black feathers here and there. Standing in his birthday suit, Lux shot a few poses in the mirror, admiring his chiseled, athletic physique, muscles rippling in all the right places. Suffice it to say, he was pleased with this new look, and that wasn't even mentioning the impressive manhood dangling between his legs. Unfortunately, his posing session was cut short when the mysterious archway he'd nearly forgotten about lit up with an ominous glow before two figures plopped out of nowhere. A new god's conquest. Rose Potter, the girl who lived, and, savior of the wizarding world, didn't know how she got herself into this mess. Well, that wasn't completely true. It was just another of the yearly showdowns with Voldemort that she was forced to handle by himself while Dumbledore was nowhere to be found. Sirius, the only sense of family she had left, had been sent through the veil of death, and something finally snapped. She wouldn't just stand by and do nothing this time, and seeing that fucking bitch, Bellatrix, madly cackling next to the veil, her decision was made. Catching the mad woman off guard, she didn't have the time to react to her desperate tackle, only hoping to get a modicum of revenge on her way out. A new god's conquest. Lux let out another sigh. He'd been doing that a lot lately. But he felt it was deserved this time. Even with the cave in complete darkness, his vision was beyond perfect, so after nudging one of the figures over and finding a young girl with a conspicuous lightning bolt scar on her forehead, he wondered how many crossover elements were going to be a part of his life. He didn't even know what world he was in, and already he had to deal with wizards from an alternative Harry Potter verse. And just as he was wondering about crossovers, he sensed the unmistakable presence of a sacred gear from the girl. He needed more information, and he wasn't going to use Femme Harry as a test subject for his first time casting mind magic. Well, not when he had a better option at least. He looked at the other body that came out of the stone arch. Yeah, that was definitely the lunatic, Bellatrix Lestrange. But this Bella was different. If you disregard the appalling dental situation, she was an absolute bombshell of a mature woman. Lux figured it must be the witch's magic keeping her in such good form. Before scouring the woman's mind, given the situation, Lux knew exactly what he'd use his essence of creation on first. Just because he was now a baby god and an angel, he hadn't forgotten his dream of becoming a sorcerer god king ruling countless dimensions. And what better power for this situation than the essence of the Archmage? Sure, he wouldn't be able to create the real thing for now, but a lesser version would do the trick. Linking his thoughts with his new power, he felt the stores of his essence hit rock bottom before a series of texts entered his mind. Lesser essence of the Archmage. Perfect memory with infinite storage. Limited. Beyond genius level intellect. Limited. Immunity to insanity and mimetic hazards. Things man was not meant to know, becomes more of a guideline than a rule. Limited. Capacity to learn any magic with enough understanding. This also includes things like ki, chakra, soul power, etc. Limited. Possess an internal supernatural reactor that can adapt to any supernatural energy to fuel spells, enchantments, powers, etc. This reactor provides a steady supply of power that will grow with training and practice. Limited. Can teach others systems of magic even if they previously lacked the capacity. Their proficiency with said magic is determined by various factors such as bloodline and state of mind. Limited. Manipulate entire systems of magic or combine them with experimentation. Limited. He whistled at that. It was honestly more than he was hoping for. Now he was ready to get the information he wanted. With his new limited form of the essence of the Archmage, he was now even more confident in getting all he wanted from the crazy woman's mind than before. Kneeling next to the woman, Lux patted her down, finding and confiscating her main wand, a spear, and a small dagger. If his hands lingered in certain areas a little too long, who was there to call him out on it? It was a testament to the amount of bullshit he'd been through in such a short time that he didn't even react to a dark mist shooting out from Femme Harry's scar in a shower of blood, interrupting his very important bodily inspection. Lux wasn't retarded, so he knew where this was going. Before the soul fragment could escape and become a problem for a later plot point, he surrounded the wraith in a prison of golden, holy light. Unsurprisingly, Bold Ghost took offense, trying his best to bash his way out. Lux could only guess that his holy power didn't feel too good for the tainted soul fragment, as it eventually gave up its struggle and tried to stay as far away from the barrier as possible. Lux figured this would be even better than his first plan of getting information on magic and their world from Bellatrix. There was no doubt that, aside from Dumbledore, he was unlikely to find a better source of the wizarding world's form of magic. And even that was debatable. As manipulative as Dumbledore seemed in the books, he was sure Voldemort would go to far greater lengths to get the magical knowledge he wanted. There was no doubt that, at the very least, the Dark Lord would give him the best understanding of what they would call dark magic. Almost forgetting about it, Lux cast a simple holy healing spell to make sure Harry didn't bleed out on him before getting to work on the soul fragment. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Deranged. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. With Voldemort's wraith glaring at him. At least he guessed it was glaring, it didn't have eyes. After all, Lux prepared to suck him dry of all that juicy magical knowledge. Okay, maybe that was a poor way to phrase it. Gesturing towards the ghost, an intricate golden seal appeared within the barrier before his consciousness felt like it had been pulled away from his body as he flipped through the life of Tom Marvolo Riddle. Even with this being only a fragment of his soul, Tom's memories, up until the night he murdered the Potters, had been perfectly preserved. Lux guessed that the measly half a lifetime of memories was nothing compared to the amount of information a soul could hold. For such a low-level supernatural being that Voldemort was, it took him only minutes to categorize everything of interest into his perfect memory. As he figured, the two seemed to be from another weird crossover universe. This time, it was a much simpler mix of Harry Potter and high school DxD. He thought that with all the other supernatural beings, the story of Harry Potter would vastly change, but it seemed the wizards and witches didn't have much of a presence with the greater supernatural community, preferring to keep to themselves. With that done, he was ready to leave the cave and find out if the outside world was another fictional one he knew. But first, he put away his wings before using the transfiguration knowledge he'd stolen to conjure up a simple black shirt and trousers, along with a band to tie his long hair back. Not wanting to deal with Bellatrix's particular brand of madness at the moment, Lux flicked an overcharged stunning charm at the unconscious woman with the wand he'd looted. He'd save that conversation for after figuring out what type of world they'd stumbled into. Looking at Harry, he decided to send a stunner her way too. Still, he was excited to explore. He'd put the crazy death world he came from on the back burner for now. He needed to get a grasp on his essence of creation. After all, he still didn't know how the mysterious ability judged how much essence to award. The cavern the two ended up in had no exit in sight, the only hint of an outside world being the small cracks allowing air to enter the room. Even if it was just the Harry, Lux was sure the girl would figure a way out. With his mastery over the mystical arts gained from the memories of Voldemort and his lesser archmage essence, the stone walls parted like a field of grass as he strolled along, the bodies of Bellatrix and Harry dutifully levitating at his side. Finally breaking through to the surface, the dark pathway he created was bathed in light as the harsh winter winds battered the trio. If it weren't for the warming charms he'd placed on the two witches early on their journey, they'd likely have already died from exposure. Lux overlooked a densely forested valley with the mountain he'd just carved his way out of on one side and one nearly twice the height on the other. But the annoying part was over now. With his line of sight no longer interrupted by the cave walls, he could simply apparate his way around. Not wanting to wander around randomly and wanting to figure out his current location, he cast a human revealing charm with enough juice to cover the valley. It seemed he was lucky enough not to have spawned in a completely uninhabited wilderness. With a pop, Lux and his captives disappeared from the mountain peak, reappearing in the snow-covered forest. It only took 3 more uses of line-of-sight apparition before he found the nearest signal his charm had picked up, 2 scraggly men covered head to toe in animal pelts. From the bows slung across their backs, Lux assumed they were out hunting. Leaving Bellatrix and Harry propped up against a tree, he made his way toward the 2 men. He wasn't trying to be discreet, and after a few steps in their direction, the hunters turned to him, drawing their stone weapons after finding a stranger so close. After their surprise seemed to wear off and exchanging a few words, Lux noticed the 2 start to eye him up like a particularly succulent piece of meat. His enhanced senses easily picked up their conversation, and the ability to speak and understand all languages that came along with being an angel came in handy. Apparently, Lux's man-meat was on their menu for tonight. Savage cannibals, Lux scoffed, about to incapacitate the two with a spell before one of his soul-bound companions grabbed his attention. Oh, you wanna play, Noir? Sure, come out and have your fun. Aurora seemed satisfied to simply watch her surroundings from inside his soul, so he only summoned one of the little troublemakers. The two locals obviously didn't know what Lux was murmuring to himself about, but the small wolf walking out from behind a tree and growling as menacing as the little cutie could manage did get their attention. He could see the greed in the two's eyes, and after hearing the men's whispers, he knew why. The fuckers thought the pitch-black wolf pup would fetch a good price. Did you hear that, baby girl? These bad men want to separate us, Lux sneered. Why don't you show them why that's a bad idea? His words seemed to provoke the little wolf, and with a blur, Noir appeared behind one of the men, now covered snout to tail in blood and gore, a suspiciously Noir-shaped hole in the hunter's torso. Girl, I was hoping to catch them alive, Lux deadpanned at the wolf, sending him a questioning head tilt, trying to appear as innocent and cute as possible in her current state. Try to bring his friend in one piece this time, he scolded the pup, pointing toward the remaining hunter fleeing in terror. Noir seemed to grumble at that but still sped over to the man who hadn't gotten very far. The man desperately clawed at the ground as the supernaturally strong puppy dragged him over, her jaw locked around his leg before Lux hit the savage with a full-body bind curse, ready to get some information about the world he'd found himself in. A new god's conquest. Lux sat on a rock next to the campfire he'd started, leisurely stroking his two wolves' soft fur. Thankfully, they could dismiss their menacing blades at will, so he didn't need to worry about getting sliced up during cuddle time. He'd gotten all the information he needed from the hunter to start working on his future plans. Unfortunately for the hunter, the man's brain didn't have an enjoyable time when Lux tore through his life's memories, using it as practice with his new legilimency abilities. He ended up brain dead, but his usefulness had run out anyway. The local didn't know much about the greater world, but it was still enough for him to figure out what world he was in. He was either in A Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones. More specifically, he was in Skagos, a land just the slightest bit more civilized than Beyond the Wall. He couldn't get the exact year from the peasants since news of the Seven Kingdoms rarely reached the island, but at the very least the hunter knew that the Targaryens had already lost the throne. Unless the gods of this world were real, something Lux highly doubted, conquering this measly world would be child's play. Lux figured that, at most, what the locals referred to as gods were nothing more than magic taking a sentient form. And even then, they didn't seem to directly interfere with the world much. Lux planned to eventually conquer this world, but for the moment, his goals were simple. Figure out his essence of creation and gain further power using his archmage essence to expand his magical repertoire. And he would definitely need that power for when he ended up returning to this body's original world. Sure, he could simply avoid the dangerous world, but that wasn't his style. There was too much to be gained for him to hide away like a rat. Still, if everything went according to Kikaku, his power would grow more than enough to face the future threats. With the weird crossover he'd found himself in, there were more than enough options to choose from to increase his strength. For example, the Dark Lord had knowledge of Tuki and Senjutsu. Fortunately for the wizarding world, by the time he learned of those powers, the damage done to his soul by the Horcruxes prevented him from mastering the skills. Honestly, wizarding magic was a considerably weaker form of devil magic that would likely harmlessly bounce off his body. If it weren't for his archmage essence allowing him to expand on magical systems, he wouldn't bother with it beyond its utility. But Tuki and Senjutsu were just the beginning of his plans. There were plenty of powers from various other universes with similar origins that he hoped to learn. Haki from One Piece must involve some sort of spiritual or physical energies similar to Tuki. So, could he learn it? Senjutsu practitioners wielded chakra. Could he expand on the limited uses that the DxD universe showed to create jutsu on the levels shown in Naruto? For now, these were just theories that he'd need to experiment with. On top of all his plans for power and conquest, Lux wouldn't neglect what he considered to be of utmost importance, enjoying this second chance at life to the fullest. He wouldn't put his plans of becoming the strongest aside, but what would be the point of all of that without having his fun? And speaking of fun, Lux looked toward the unconscious, crazy woman he'd nearly forgotten about. A new god's conquest. She woke up with a groan. What the hell happened? Her foggy memories slowly came back. She'd just been reveling in the glee that came from sending her blood traitor of a cousin to his death. Then, Potter. The Potter brat ruined everything. How could she serve her lord when she was dead? Wait, was she dead? She did tumble through the veil of death, right? Before Bellatrix could figure out for herself if she were dead or alive, the sound of someone clearing their throat knocked her out of those thoughts. This also made her realize that based on her surroundings, it was unlikely she was dead. Her combat instincts, honed over the years, brought her back to her senses, her hand going for her wand before turning to the stranger. Even when prepared to fight to the death, she froze for a moment at the sight of the man's appearance. She could honestly say that she'd never seen a more attractive man. But those thoughts were immediately consumed by rage after noticing the man holding her wand. Oh, finally noticed, huh? His mocking tone only deepened the scowl on her face. Bastard, hand over my wand if you don't want to die the most painful death imaginable. She threatened, only getting a laugh from the man holding her at wand point. Those are some strong words for someone without the ability to fight back, he continued to mock her. But enough of the word games, how about we make a deal? What kind of deal? She bit back, not having much of a choice but going along with his demands. I think a simple duel will suffice, but if you lose, your life will be mine, he said, making her pause. Was he a dullard? There were only 2 men she would admit defeat to when it came to battle. Was he really going to give up his advantage? Fine, it's not like I have much of a choice, she agreed, a nasty smile finding its way onto her face, ready to put this foreigner in his place. Bellatrix didn't fully believe the man was going to fight her in a fair fight until he casually tossed her precious wand in her direction. That didn't mean she was going to play fair, though. Feeling the familiar connection in hand, she directed all of her fury and indignation toward the man who hadn't gotten his own wand out yet. Bellatrix's manic grin at having the opportunity to unleash a torrent of varied curses quickly turned to confusion as the man she was growing increasingly frustrated with casually batted her spells away with his bare hands. Why won't you just die? She roared in between each wave of her wand, each curse becoming darker and crueler as her frustration grew. Avada Kedavra, she finally cried out, now panting and heaving on her knees from exhaust. Her last curse at least got a reaction more than a casual wave of a hand, but it was all still in vain as the sickly green ray harmlessly bounced off a shimmering barrier. Well, that was something. But I think it should be my turn now, don't you? The detestable man asked, and she could only let out a snarl in response. Crucio, Lux pointed the mad woman's spare wand at its owner, watching the red beam turn her into a convulsive mess, writhing on the ground. Even though it hadn't happened in this timeline, this one's for you, Dobby. After a few minutes of uncaringly torturing the woman, he cut off the curse, satisfied that a beloved character had been avenged. Crossing the gap to Bellatrix's downed form, he had to give it to her. The woman had grit, managing to get to her knees by the time he stood in front of her, even after being under the unforgivable for so long. I'd say that it's my win, Lux smirked, digging the end of his wand into her neck before prying the wand from her hand. Get it over with, bastard. But know this, you'll be begging for the same release once my lord gets his hands on you, Bellatrix swore, assuming this would be the end for herself. I think you've misunderstood something, my dear. I said your life would be mine, not that it would be over. So, no, you won't be dying today, you'll just have a new master from now on, Lux said, making the crazy lady's anger soar to new heights. Ha, and what makes you think I'll go along with that? I'd happily die before betraying my lord, she denied his kind offer, making him simply smile at that. I never said it would be easy, but I'd say that I can be very persuasive when needed. Pain is nothing new to me. Do your worst, bastard, she spat. Lux nodded at that. You're right, I doubt torture will get us anywhere. That bit earlier was just me blowing off some steam. No, pain is so barbaric, but I can think of a few other ways that will have a woman like yourself willingly kneeling at my feet. Grabbing her chin, Lux ran a finger along the woman's undeniably seductive lips. Such beauty, too bad it's been tainted, he lamented, pulling her lower lip to reveal the rotten set of teeth. Worry not, my dear, I can fix that. I don't know what game you're playing, but you'll regret keeping me alive, Bellatrix said as he took a step back from the seething woman. Lux didn't bother responding to that, instead snapping a finger, his golden seal appearing beneath the woman's kneeling form. Bellatrix looked around in confusion as the golden light began reconstructing her body, years of abuse and neglect spent in Azkaban washing away like it never happened. With only the basics of holy healing magic given to him by his father, healing the deranged woman was still super easy, barely an inconvenience. Even with magic, her body was still in the realm of mortals. When cast on such mundane flesh, the spell could heal anything, including death if it hadn't been too long. As the golden light reached its pinnacle, he noticed Bellatrix grabbing her arm in pain, the iconic dark mark writhing around on her skin before his holy light took offense to the vile magic. The woman's pain turned to agony as a dark mist was released from the mark. Once released from her body, the Dark Lord's magic stood no chance against his light, and the tainted mist vaporized under his power. His light faded, and Lux watched in amusement as the Dark Lord's sycophant became belligerent at the loss of her master's slave mark. You bastard. Even if it takes me the rest of my existence, you will pay. Count your days, you fuck. While it was amusing to banter with the psychopath for a short time, Lux was starting to get tired of her ramblings. Gesturing with a grasp at the now fully healed Bellatrix, he didn't cast a spell but instead commanded his raw magical power to lock the woman's movements. With a simple use of transfiguration, both of their clothes turned into butterflies before landing on some nearby branches. From what little movement Bellatrix could make with her eyes, he knew that move shocked her, but more than anything, she was now furious. Lux traced his steadily hardening shaft along the woman's lips, revealing a brand new set of pearly whites. Earlier he wouldn't have wanted to go anywhere near that rotten mess, but now the sight of the mature beauty on her knees had him anticipating how her pouty lips would feel wrapped around his cock. I think it's time to start your training. How about you start by worshipping your new lord from there on your knees, Lux teased, taking a small step back and releasing her jaw from his magical bindings. Don't you even dare, Bellatrix screamed, making him chuckle. What's wrong? Weren't you used to serving your previous master like this? Oh, wait, that's right, he lost those parts that made him a man long ago, Lux mocked, knowing from the Dark Lord's memories that he'd sacrificed those parts for power somewhere down the line. Before Bellatrix could start hysterically cursing him for hitting a sore spot, his magic locked her jaw open, tongue invitingly hanging out. Rubbing his tip along the moist appendage quickly got him to full mast before Lux began using her sexy mouth as a living fleshlight. He'd needed this. After all the shenanigans he'd been put through, at least now he could enjoy a woman's convulsing throat wrapped around his cock. Half of him loved seeing the hatred and helplessness in the woman's eyes as he used her mouth for his pleasure. The other half was content that the wicked was being punished. Lux knew that these were his two opposing divinities at work. He also knew that with his essences, especially the mimetic defense gained from the Archmage, he could suppress their effects on his mind at any time. But there was no need for that, not when his divinities were working in his favor, one side giving him hints on bending the woman's devotion towards himself and the other urging him to devour what made Bellatrix herself. He'd go for a mix of the two. After all, in this medieval world without proper entertainment, dealing with the bitchy psychopath might stave off some of his future boredom. Still, this wasn't as pleasurable for him as it could be, what basically only counted as masturbating with a toy not able to send him over the edge. There was a solution for that, though. Satisfy your master, Lux commanded, not needing the incantation for the imperious curse he'd cast before releasing his hold on the woman's movements. While vague, his intentions had been properly conveyed through the magic, letting out a groan as Bellatrix took his shaft in hand before gently sucking on one of his balls, her tongue doing interesting things as her hand stroked up and down. After spending a good amount of time pleasuring his sack, Bellatrix finally worked her way to his cock, lathering feather-like kisses from base to tip with her pouty lips. Seeming to know his anticipation had reached its limit, the mind-controlled woman took him into her mouth, her delicate tongue swirling around the fleshy underneath of his tip. Lux wondered if it was the Imperio or if the woman was just that skilled as she took his well-above-average dick completely down her throat that seemed to have no gag reflex. Either way, the experience was one of the most pleasurable he could remember. Feeling his climax nearing, Lux grabbed a handful of her beautiful, long wavy hair, increasing the pace, the rapid squelching sounds finally sending him over the edge. Lux released his imperious curse just as he shot his first rope down Bellatrix's waiting throat, watching in amusement as her glazed-over expression turned to absolute disgust. Before she could attempt to bite off the intruding phallus, he backed away, releasing the rest of his load on her enraged face. Quote. You will pay, even if it's the last thing I do, she managed to say, panting on the ground. For some reason, Lux didn't feel very threatened by the woman covered in his cum. Somehow, I highly doubt that will happen. But I think you might get some enjoyment out of what's coming next, he said, making her shudder at the menacing tone. Those words didn't reassure her at all. And she was right. As he waved his wand, the ground transformed around her, shackling her wrists and neck, forcing her into a very suggestive position with a ball gag making sure her incessant threats would be put to an end. With Bellatrix now bound ass up in a pillory, Lux traced her seductive body, grabbing a handful of her lovely hanging tit flesh before making his way to her juicy ass. He wasn't surprised after spreading her delectable cheeks to find a thick, untrimmed bush. He doubted she'd been getting any action since her release from Azkaban. After all, wiser men than him knew not to stick their dick in crazy. Luckily, wizarding magic had a solution to many of the small problems like this, and with a wave of his hand, she was shaved clean, exposing her puffy pussy and crinkled hole to the crisp winter air. She shivered, making her lovely hips jiggle enticingly, and he didn't hold back from running a finger between her pink slit, making her growl through the gag. Wanting to get to the main course, Lux didn't play with her too long before lining up his throbbing cock, slowly inching his way into her surprisingly tight hole. Despite her efforts, Bellatrix couldn't stop herself from letting out a reluctantly pleasured moan as he reached depths previously unexplored. Lux had that godly dick. It would take a will far greater than the pretty little psychopath's not to feel anything from his deep thrusts. Speeding up his movements, and seeing that she was nearly lost in the pleasure, Lux figured it was a good time to start his manipulations. The same golden seal he used to read Voldemort's memories appeared on the back of the woman he was roughly clapping the cheeks of. It wouldn't be a simple task, nor would it be perfectly done on the first attempt, but his divinities gave him a helping hand to mold the woman to his desires. But as he felt his second climax of the night approaching, the sopping wet cunt trying to milk him dry, he wouldn't mind repeating this process however many times it would take. Buried deep into his conquest, Lux surrendered to the pleasure, filling the needy womb with his divine seed. He wouldn't worry about pregnancy. After all, he wouldn't mind starting a new pantheon of his own. He didn't want to be left alone to handle all of the busy work, not when he could be having fun instead. Lux didn't stop there, continuing the night of debauchery while mind-fucking Bellatrix into obedience, all while Femme Harry was left forgotten and unconscious under an invisibility charm. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. Minions. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. As the sun crested the horizon, Lux dismissed the haphazardly summoned BDSM gear, Bellatrix collapsing into a panting, sweaty mess. He'd fuck the woman's mature cunt all night long, all while thoroughly fucking her mind. Lux was sure Bellatrix was in a worse mental state than during her time spent in Azkaban, but it was a mental state that would benefit him, and he was pretty sure he could work out the kinks with enough time. Such a good girl, he praised, kneeling next to the mess of a woman, and gently stroking her cheek. Say, Bella, who am I to you? He asked, some light returning to her eyes. NNGH. M Master. N no, my God. Why yes, my God, she answered, nuzzling against his thigh, clearly mad with devotion. Chuckling, Lux let the exhausted woman fall asleep in his lap as he ran his fingers through her hair. He wouldn't deny her the small comfort for a time, not when he'd basically turned her into a brainwashed slave. Lux was still feeling fresh as a cucumber with his divine physique. Wanting to get some things done this morning, he waved his hands, commanding magic to do his bidding. Bella's cutely snoring self floated from his lap, the many bodily fluids she'd been covered in now gone after a cleaning charm. A conjured set of pajamas dressed themselves on her nude form before being placed in a fur-lined bedroll near the fire to get some proper rest. Lux realized his proficiency with transfiguration and conjuration came naturally to him, figuring it might have something to do with his father being a god of creation. He also figured that his inheritance from his mother, or second father, would make his next endeavor go smoother. Getting up after cleaning and clothing himself, Lux evilly rubbed his hands together while walking over to the dead hunters he'd tossed in a nearby ditch. Pausing, he glanced at Femme Harry slumped over a rock that he'd forgotten about. Fuck it, she can wait. Lux's plans were simple. He needed minions to handle the dirty work. With the education level of the locals in Skagos, he wouldn't bet on getting any useful hands there. To him, these cannibalistic savages were barely considered human. This isolated land was probably the best in Planetos for him to begin creating his loyal undead army. Could it be considered genocide? Sure, but he wouldn't lose any sleep putting the subhumans out of their misery. Their unlives would probably be far more fulfilling as part of his horde anyway. Reaching the corpses, Lux placed his hands on them, imbuing his magic through the bodies using the plundered knowledge from the Dark Lord, along with his divinity associated with darkness lending a helping hand. Like his holy light incorporates aspects of life and creation, his darkness encompasses death and destruction. His first minions got to their knees, swearing silent fealty and ready for orders. Instead of the hideous monstrosities of the Inferi, these two were far easier on the eyes, obsidian black skin, frost white hair, and glowing golden eyes. Lux was just thankful that his divinity helped with this. He really didn't want to lower himself to using those trash undead that could barely keep the rotten flesh on their bones. He had standards, after all. Gesturing for them to rise, Lux patted their shoulders, finding them far sturdier than what you'd expect from a common undead or zombie. He looked into their eyes, finding a glint of intelligence. They didn't have souls, no, that would be beyond his current limits, but with the corpses still having their brains intact, his minions retained some of their previous selves. For now, they couldn't even be described as having artificial intelligence. Even machine learning might be going too far. Still, they could follow simple instructions, enough to get the job done. He should give his first minions names, Lux thought. Turning to the first of his undead, the one that didn't have a hole in its torso from Noir, he tilted his head, thinking for a moment. You'll be Cain, he said, then looked at the other. And you'll be Abel, Lux decided. Okay, he'd admit he wasn't the most creative when it comes to naming. Lux stumbled backward a few steps, nearly falling to his knees after those final words left his lips. This was the first time he'd felt exhaustion after taking over this body. Color him surprised after noticing his undead bathed in a golden radius before their forms shifted, growing taller and gaining chiseled muscles. Shit, he didn't know he could bestow power with a name. Lux could still feel the loss of divinity that was used for the process. It was nothing permanent, but it meant it wasn't something he'd be spamming all willy-nilly. His godly powers were still new, and he didn't have it in him to create an army of named undead yet. But looking at his goons now standing nearly 2 heads above him, he didn't regret it at all. Not when he gained 2 capable leaders for his future army. Satisfied, Lux conjured up 2 basic spears, handing them over and sending Cain and Abel on their way with his mental orders. He wanted more minions, and how could he call himself a necromancer without a few massacres here and there? Lux wasn't heartless. He'd at least leave the women and children alive. Who knows, maybe if they can survive without their protectors, they might have a far better life after he conquers this savage land. Before he could turn back to the camp, Noir jumped out of her sacred gear, eagerly wagging her tail. Sure, you can go watch over them, Lux chuckled, watching the little pup bound after his minions. A new god's conquest. Catching up to her father's creations, Noir looked them over with a hint of disdain. They were slow, but what else could she expect from barely above shambling corpses? She'd need to whip these 2 into shape. It would reflect poorly on her father if his first creations weren't up to par. Sniffing the air, she was at least satisfied the dullards were heading in the right direction. She could smell the rank stench that seemed common to the uncivilized swine that populated this world. Hearing the sound of a branch whipping through the air, she scoffed, seeing one of the 2 hanging from a rope latched to their leg. Seriously, what would her father do without her? Noir thought, jumping up and slicing the undead free. Noir knew she could have handled this all much better herself, but now that she had minions, she wouldn't lower herself to such nonsense. After all, what was her father's was hers too, right? Finally, she and the slowpokes reached a clearing. She held up a paw, commanding her minions to wait in the trees for now. Strutting between the few ramshackle huts, she noticed the lesser beings looking at her in awe, as they should. Men of age, willingly hand over your lives. Your greatest achievement will be serving under my father, she barked out her commands before scowling at the disobedience. Fine, we'll do this the hard way, she grumbled, and with another commanding bark, her minions trotted towards the small village, ready to put these peons in their place. Before her undead could start wreaking havoc, a man who obviously didn't know better tried to coax her over with a moldy piece of bread in one hand and a rope in the other. Now she was livid. How dare this savage try to tempt her with such lowly offerings? Summoning her trusty blade, she flicked her head to the side, sending the menacing blade tumbling through the air before landing where she knew it would hurt the most. She couldn't stop the snort of amusement from escaping her snout after seeing the man writhing on the ground, clutching his pearls. Seeing her minions arriving, she turned her back on the frightened mob, a disdainful look on her majestic face. Kill the men and anyone that gets in your way, she drawled, making the clumsy undead advance with their spears at the ready. They tried to fight back, but their measly stone weaponry, at most, pushed the undead back a few steps, not able to penetrate the obsidian flesh. As her minions terrorized the small settlement, she simply kept an eye on the battle, only needing to chase down the occasional man too cowardly to die fighting, giving them a swift end with a stab to the heart. She knew her father would prefer the bodies intact. Soon the cries of pain and fear died down, the men lying in puddles of their own blood, women and children cowering behind cover. Now all that was left was to transport the lot back to the camp. This, of course, wouldn't be on her. No, she needed to supervise her minions on the task. With her beyond excellent managerial skills, they'd likely be done by dusk. A new god's conquest. While Noir and his undead were out handling the tasks he didn't feel like dealing with, Lux poked at the roasting meat hanging over the fire. Aurora had happily gone out hunting, bringing back some kind of mountain goat, while he spent the time familiarizing himself with the long list of spells he had available. With the food almost done, Lux figured now was a good time to have a chat with Femme Harry. He also figured he should stop referring to her as Femme Harry. After all, from Voldemort's memories, he knew the girl's name was Rose Potter. Lux pointed a finger at Rose, unconscious body, a small spark forming at the tip before shooting off at the girl. Welcome back to the land of the living, he laughed as the now frizzy-haired girl spluttered awake. What? Who's there? Where am I? She stammered. Over here, Lux waved to get the girl's attention, making her turn to him, hackles raised like some scruffy alley cat. Relax, Rose. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it while you were sound asleep. He tried to calm her down, only making her even more apprehensive as she drew her wand from her back pocket. See, this is why he'd been putting this off for so long. He knew it was going to be a hassle. How do you know my name? She asked, taking a few steps away. Okay, calm down, girl. I'll explain. Let's just say a lot of stuff went down. Dark cave, spooky ghost bursting out of your scar, crazy lady trying to curse me, Lux summarized, sure that his point was succinctly conveyed. How is that an explanation? Wait, never mind that. What did you say about my scar? Rose questioned, clearly not on the same intellectual level as himself. Lux let out a sigh. Fine, girl, let me just show you, he scoffed before waving his hand, the same light mirror he used back in the cave conjured in front of the confused witch. My hair, she screeched, frantically trying to tame the frizzy dark red locks while he covered his ears at the ungodly sound. Girl, I think there are more pressing matters at hand than your hairdo, Lux scolded, making her look at him like he was some kind of simpleton. I wouldn't expect you to understand. And stop calling me, girl, we look about the same age, Rose protested, making him deadpan at her. The sad part was that she was right. The body he'd taken over seemed to be in its middle teens. For heaven's sake, even his undead minions towered over his 5'9" manlet height. Kids these days, they don't even know how to recognize an old soul, he responded intellectually, making her deadpan right back at him. Okay, enough, just look at your forehead, he slid past the issue, seeing that she couldn't understand where he was coming from. Finally, the girl listened, taking a closer look and running a finger over the spot where her iconic scar was previously. How? She mumbled, trailing off. Like I said, spooky ghost calling himself Voldemort bursting out of your scar, Lux didn't elaborate further. You're kidding, right? Was Voldemort really in my head? She asked, almost despondently. Well, a fragment of him was. A nasty bit of magic it was. Nothing yours truly couldn't handle though, Lux verbally patted himself on the back. And my eyes? She asked. Ah, yes, quite a beautiful set of peepers you got there. Goes great with your lovely red hair, he teased, chuckling at the blush Rose was trying to hide. I meant, why can I see clearly without glasses? She tried to hide her embarrassment. You were bleeding out, so I kindly decided to heal you up. My spell must have decided that your poor eyesight had to go. Rose, attention was drawn back to the mirror as she seemed amazed by her newly perfected vision. Not even a thanks. What was he, chopped liver? After getting herself together, Rose seemed to come back to her senses, realizing the situation that he'd been distracting her from with his banter. Was there an older man? She asked desperately. Lux shook his head. I only found you two near the weird portal. He nodded toward the sleeping Bellatrix, making her look over before her face twisted in rage. I'll kill her. Rose ignored him, apparently getting ready to curse the older woman to death. Before she could start flinging spells, Lux raised a light barrier between the two. Girl, we're lost in a foreign world. Now's not the time to be killing each other. What he left out was that he wanted to keep the woman around because she had a magical snatch, pun intended. You don't know what she's done, what she's capable of, Rose argued before pausing. Wait, what do you mean, foreign world? It is what it is. This isn't Earth, Lux deadpanned. You can't expect me to believe that, Rose said. Believe what you will, but with magic, why wouldn't a portal to another world be believable? Lux questioned, making her think about it. Okay, fine, but whether we're in another world or not, this woman can't be trusted, Rose continued pushing for Bellatrix's death. Like I said earlier, the two of us got off on the wrong foot, but we've come to a sort of agreement, Lux said as Rose paced around in irritation. Aurora seemed to sense her distress, walking over to nuzzle her leg, trying to comfort the girl. Obviously, Rose jumped away after being surprised by the little wolf, but after a cute head tilt, she put out a hesitant hand to go for a few pats. Aurora was such a caring girl. On the other hand, he could feel the mischief Noir was up to through their bond. Okay, Fine, but show me where you found me. I need to look for any traces of my godfather, she said, now seeming calmed down after stroking the floof. Sure, let's go now, he agreed, holding a hand out. Rose still seemed hesitant. What's your name, anyway? She asked. Lux, he smiled. Fine, let's go, Lux. She grumbled, reluctantly taking the offered hand, trying not to blush at his radiant grin. Lux's proficiency with apparition seemed to reach the limit of what wizards in the Harry Potter universe were capable of, this time appearing back in the cave without a sound. Rose was surprised at the instant teleportation that she could barely notice. Normally she'd be hurling her guts out from the form of magic that seemed to hate her for no reason. Lumos Maxima, she heard Lux chant, revealing the cavern with a large archway and countless skeletal bodies. Follow me, over here is where you landed, Lux gave her a light nudge. She was standing in a daze. With her luck, she didn't have high hopes of ever reuniting with her only family member, and after seeing the piles of bones, the dreaded thoughts nearly overwhelmed her. Reaching where Lux stopped, she looked around in a daze until her heart sank, falling to her knees with tears flowing down her face. She recognized the clothes on one of the skeletons. There was no doubt, they belonged to her godfather. Rose was almost too lost in sorrow to notice the comforting hand on her shoulder. She looked up, surprised that it was the first time she saw a serious expression on his face, one that let her know he understood what she was going through. Somehow the boy her age who had powers beyond anything she'd heard of always seemed to be able to drag her away from her dark thoughts. Sure, most of the time he did so by annoying the hell out of her, but it was better than freaking out and losing her mind. Whoever he was to you, I know he wouldn't want you to give up, he comforted, and she couldn't help the small smile that found its way onto her face. It felt nice knowing that at the very least, she wasn't alone in this place that, if he was right, was a completely different world. You're right, he would probably be making jokes about how he ended up as a bag of bones, she said, standing and wiping the tears from her face. Thanks, Lux, I needed to hear that, she said, making him put on that way too attractive grin he always seemed to wear. It's my pleasure, Rose, he replied before pointing toward the large archway. And if you need more of a reason to go on, that's where the portal formed and spat you out. I'm sure that with enough study, I'll be able to recreate the portal. There must be people waiting on the other side for you. Her face lit up. He was right. Hermione, Ginny, she was beginning to think she'd never see her friends again, but now there was hope. She couldn't stop herself from reaching out and pulling the person who seemed to have all the answers she needed into a tight hug. He reminded her a little of Hermione for that reason. Let's go back. We need to get some food and you, she heard him say before their surroundings seamlessly returned to the familiar camp. With her head still buried in his shirt, Rose didn't see the especially evil grin on Lux's face. Hey, it's going to be so much fun corrupting this protagonist, he thought. Feeling a nudge on his leg, he noticed Aurora giving him a dirty look as if to say, I like this girl. You better not be planning what I think you're planning. Lux smiled wryly at that. Okay, fine, maybe just a smidge of corruption, he replied through their soul connection, making the little pup nod her head in satisfaction like she did something grand. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. Subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 4. Undead. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Rose poked around the plate of mystery meat she'd been given, lamenting her current situation. But hey, at least she had a stupidly powerful wizard at her side who seemed capable of feats even Dumbledore couldn't pull off. That was a question she didn't want to bring up. How did he end up in the same place as them? She was sure she would have noticed the stupidly handsome teen if he had been in the ministry at the same time as them. Another question she had while eating the surprisingly good meal was, how did Lux get spices and seasoning out in the middle of nowhere? She figured her questions could wait, though. After all, as much as she was feeling better after getting a pep talk from him, she was still nearly freaking out over here. And looking over at the still sleeping Bellatrix, Rose frowned. She really didn't want anything to do with the woman responsible for her godfather's death. She'd been trying to get her savior to at least leave Bellatrix behind. There was no doubt in Rose's mind that they'd end up taking a curse to the back sooner rather than later. But he wouldn't budge. Looking over at the older woman's two large pillowy mounds gently rising up and down as she snored, Rose wondered if there was a deeper reason why Lux insisted on keeping Bellatrix around. Nah, it couldn't be. Anyway, she just hoped the insane follower of the Dark Lord wouldn't wake up anytime soon. She simply wanted some peace to get her mind together. Almost as if her luck had it out for her, and she was certain it did, she saw Bellatrix start to stir before her eyes snapped open, looking side to side, seemingly searching for something. Rose grabbed her wand, seeing Bellatrix rush at Lux, sure she was going on the attack. Instead, her mouth hung open, seeing the murderous woman lovingly drape herself over Lux before nuzzling into his neck, obscenely sucking and licking his flesh. Somehow, Lux didn't even seem flustered by this, instead returning the woman's affection by grabbing a handful of one of her large breasts. Rose looked down at her own before almost letting out a growl of annoyance. Whatever, she didn't care. Those fatty sacks would just get in the way, and it's not like she wanted to be in the psychopath's place with her attractive savior. Ahem, she cleared her throat, seeing the two's lecherous groping start to get even more heated, wondering if Lux had forgotten she was there. Lux didn't seem surprised by her interruption, but Bellatrix's previously adoring gaze turned to hatred when their eyes met, making Rose involuntarily shiver. She knew there were few who could match the woman's skill with a wand, and if it wasn't for Lux still being around, Rose would have likely already gotten the hell out of there. Potter, it's all your fault. Wait, why? No my god, ah. Bellatrix rambled before breaking out into hysterical screeching, nearly breaking down into sobs. Did Bellatrix somehow become even crazier? The episode didn't last long, though. Lux got up to run a comforting hand through her hair, putting an end to her mental breakdown, something Rose definitely wasn't at all jealous of. Still, Bellatrix sent her a nasty glare before switching up on the spot, stroking Lux's cheek and giving him the closest thing to puppy dog eyes that she could pull off. My god, please allow me to dispose of this filthy half-blood, Bella begged, making Lux run a hand down his face with a sigh. Next to him, Rose cocked an eyebrow, sending him a dirty look. She'd been complaining about keeping the psychopath around, her glare telling him, I told you so. Like Lux figured, his mindfuckery wouldn't be perfect on the first use. Bella still seemed to have him as the most important figure in her mind, but that obviously didn't extend to the teen girl who was somehow the mortal enemy of the strongest Dark Lord. Now, Bella, let's put plans of murder aside for now. You two might be the only magicals in this world, so let's all work together, yeah. Lux tried to coax the murder-hungry witch away from making any rash decisions. He figured sitting around the campfire, singing Kumbaya, wouldn't solve anything, so the most he could do was distract her until the next brainwashing session. I won't say I told you so, but Rose tried teasing him, but his skin was too thick for that to bother him. Did you say something? He smartly replied, making Rose scoff and roll her eyes. Fine, but what's this god nonsense, and what do you mean, the only two magicals? There's three of us here, Rose asked, deciding to move on from the verbal spat she'd obviously lost. Oh, my sweet summer child. Lux stood, propping a leg up on the log he'd been using as a seat before gesturing grandly. Not only am I a god, but in the future, I'll be the god, he told her, receiving only a deadpan in return for some reason. Bella got to her knees, nodding fervently at his grand proclamation. Seemingly unable to stop herself, Bella nuzzled her face against his thigh, her hand going in for the prize all while Rose was on the side looking like she was about to puke up the fine meal they had eaten earlier. Sure, you're a god, whatever. If you want to pretend to be all mysterious, then that's fine. But for Merlin's sake, whatever's going on there, please make it stop, Rose whined, making him nod. She's right, woman, not in front of the child, Lux scolded, swatting Bella's naughty hand away from his bulge. She cutely pouted, making him chuckle. None of that, my dear. We'll be having our fun later tonight, he reassured her, hearing a gagging sound coming from Rose's direction. Well, at least he prevented a catfight from starting, Lux thought with a nod of contentment. But this made him realize something. He needed to find a permanent residence so they could distance themselves, and he wouldn't even need to bother preventing a fight in the first place. That wasn't the only reason. Lux also figured out that he wasn't, at all, built for this life of bumming it around a campfire in the woods. No, he wanted luxury, damn it, and he was going to get it. He didn't know how people could actually enjoy this because if it wasn't for his magic keeping him entertained, he'd have thrown a fit by now. So, he'd need to hasten his plans to conquer this little island. There was nothing stopping him from finding the nearest lord and kicking them out of their house, but the problem was, he needed manpower. He felt it would be a hassle to deal with the North and, in turn, the rest of the 7 kingdoms coming to knock on his door if it was known he'd stolen a piece of their land. Fuck those guys, though. Skagos might have been a kingdom of its own with how little oversight the Starks had with it. They couldn't even stop the Skago Sea Lords from blatantly breaking the king's laws. So, better in his hands, he reasoned. So, yeah, fuck them. But back to the situation at hand, he was going to need to put this island on lockdown before stealing a nice house for himself, and that meant creating significantly more undead minions. A new god's conquest. Nor sat on the back of one of the dead villagers, grooming her luxurious coat as her minions dragged the bodies closer to her father's camp. At least the 2 imbeciles she was forced to watch over could get one thing right. They seemed to have infinite stamina as they made multiple trips back and forth, transporting the bodies to a small ditch near the campsite. With her careful oversight, her minions were now bringing the last of the villagers just as the sun was starting to set. She perked up, feeling her father moving in her direction, unable to stop her tail from wagging side to side. Finally seeing her father, she sauntered over, basking in his praising gaze after a job well done. With a cute little hop, she landed in his arms, receiving the divine head pats she loved so much. Such a good girl, Nor. I knew I could trust you, her father praised, making her nod. See, this was why she liked her father so much. He just knew how to tell it like it was. Still in his arms, the 2 walked over to the large pile of about 50 dead locals. Nor felt her father gathering up a large amount of magic, the familiar feel of darkness he was radiating making her feel at home. She rolled her eyes, seeing the pale skin of the corpses turn black before shambling to their feet. She sighed, more minions that she would have to babysit. These are your men now. Organize them and scour the land. Leave no men alive. She listened to her father command the 2 stronger minions as if it wouldn't be her ending up taking charge. Whatever, at least she got good head pats, so she'd let it slide. Through the mental link with her father, he told her that these new minions were different. Anyone they bit would turn into a lesser undead under their command. With a wolfish grin, she hopped out of her father's embrace, giving him a nod that said, "Worry not, Pops, I'll handle this," before running off, ready to spread some chaos. A new god's conquest. Thoric Magnar, Lord of King's House, watched over his younger son swinging at a practice dummy in the yard. He felt as if he was blessed by the gods. He had more than enough heirs to ensure the safety of his line, the ratings had been bountiful, and the long summer meant that his people only had to occasionally resort to cannibalism. Things were going so well that the nonsensical rumors of the undead razing villages to the ground didn't even bother him. He figured that people would always have to make a fuss when others were prospering. That's it, lad, you'll make a fine raider in no time, he praised the little tyke before noticing one of his men-at-arms hurriedly walking over with a worried look. Ah, Joran, come, wipe that frown off your face. How about we go grab a few horns of ale, he laughed, patting his most loyal warrior on the shoulder. Thoric frowned, seeing the man still looking distressed. My lord, the small folk are at the gates, they say their village was attacked by the dead, Joran said, making him scowl. Bah, nothing but tall tales. The commoners must be looking for handouts even after having so many good farm years in a row, he spat. Fucking commoners, always coming to him begging for food and asking questions. Please, my lord, we're starving, my lord, the seas are too violent to be sailing, why do we have to eat our elderly, my lord? Why can't they just leave him be so he can drink, feast, and go on the occasional pillage in peace? My lord, they bring the injured this time. Their injuries are something I've never seen, his man tried to insist, apparently falling prey to the small folks' tales. Thoric cracked his neck in annoyance. TCH, fine, take a few men to have a look. But when you come back and it was nothing but a wild animal, I'm putting you on latrine duty for a moon, he ordered, not too serious about the punishment. As he said, it had been a good raiding year, and they had the horses and men to spare for this wild goose chase. His man scampered off to gather volunteers and ready the horses. He sighed, fuck, he wasn't even in the mood to get shit-faced any longer. He figured he might as well go up on the walls and see what this mess with the small folk was all about. Thoric frowned, he'd been doing that too much today, looking at the hastily set camp next to his gate walls. Where were all the men? He could only see disheveled women and children, some of the older lads injured, a few even missing limbs. Okay, he could admit that something perhaps worse than a wild animal might be going on. These people looked like war refugees, and no animal he knew of could cause this. But still, undead. What did people take him for? A fool, a dullard, a lackwit. He was none of those things, so he decided to just leave it to his men while he walked to the dining hall to get some meat in his belly. A new god's conquest. Oye Joran, I don't like this one bit. Burkle, one of his fellow men at arms, grumbled, making him nod. There's something off about this, he agreed. Their patrol had gone as well as could be expected, only coming across a few groups of small folk fleeing towards his lord's keep. And they all had the same story. The dead rising and killing all the men and any who tried to fight. This whole mess had his head on a constant swivel. It reminded him too much of his nightmares as a wee lad after listening to tales of the Night King from his old grams. His lord was sure that this was nothing but wild animals making a fuss, and he could only pray to the gods that it was the truth. Jorik, we'll be passing 2 nearby settlements. Should we split up? Another of his men asked, making him deadpan at the fool. Was he a lackwit? Everyone knows that in the stories, splitting up just makes it easier for the whites to get ya. Not that he believed the undead were about. No, not at all, he told himself, quickly checking his surroundings one more time. We will absolutely not be splitting up, he told them, coming to a decision. Hey, boar, methinks old Jorik over here believes what the small folks are telling us, the man japed, chuckling while Joran shot him a dirty look. Before he could scold the shithead, he shivered, the small hairs on the back of his neck rising. Something was coming, he could feel it. And as if whatever it was announcing itself, their small party came to a stop, hearing a wolf's howl that seemed so high-pitched and out of place it put everyone on edge. Still want to split up? He scathingly shot back at the men who were joking around earlier. We'll stop here and make camp, Jorik decided, none of the other spooked men disagreeing. The sun was nearly setting, and the last thing he wanted was to be out here tonight without a fire. He felt like that would be the worst decision he could make. While the others tied the horses down, he rested with his back to the fire, eyes never leaving the direction he'd heard that ominous howl. He'd ordered his men not to bring out the ale for this night, receiving grumbled complaints, but as night fell and he saw 2 burning golden orbs in the distance, he shivered, thinking that receiving their complaints was worth it. Standing, he drew the axe from his belt, the others taking the hint and arming themselves in turn. The golden orbs never moved from their position, yet he felt deep down that they would be the death of him. But that thought was put to the back of his mind when some kind of monstrosity only heard of in stories crawled into the light of the campfire. It was undoubtedly a human form, but with vile, pale gray skin, limbs bent in the wrong direction making it crawl on all fours, and milky, soulless eyes that sent shivers down his spine. They were speechless. What were you even supposed to say when your nightmares were coming true? Maybe he'd wake up soon and this would all be over. But for now, he was stuck here, one of his braver men running up to stab the creature, breaking him out of his delusions. Turkle, get back here. Men, line up, close the gaps, he ordered after shaking himself back to reality. Unfortunately for Turkle, the monster somehow brushed off being impaled in the chest, latching onto the lad's sword arm and easily dragging the young man to the ground. It wasn't the blood, nor the screams for mercy coming from one of his own that really got to him. It was the ungodly crunching of bone and tearing of sinew that nearly made him turn tail and run. But he wasn't craven enough for that, instead urging his men to hold the line as more monsters showed themselves. Aim for the heads, Jorik shouted over the sound of metal striking flesh and bone. Together they were putting up a better fight than their first casualty, but he still noticed his men being pulled into the horde when they were distracted. He needed to do something. They couldn't last like this. He looked at those same unmoving golden orbs and knew that it was their only chance. Shields up. Forward march, he cried with all he had in him, the others doing their best to keep up the morale. A new god's conquest. Perched on a cliff, Nor watched in disdain as the so-called protectors of this land were being torn apart by the lesser undead. Somehow, they were even dumber than the obsidian warriors she commanded. Hey, the locals of this world would stand no chance under her mighty paw, ahem, her father's mighty boot, is what she meant. They didn't realize it, but the undead they were fighting were just the deformed ones she wanted to get rid of. Like her father, she had standards, and the ones missing limbs, or worse, were too unsightly to keep around. Looks like they're finally making a smart move, she thought, seeing the humans moving toward the undead in charge. It was a useless move, but if they were somehow able to kill the obsidian-skinned undead, the lesser ones would return to being unmoving corpses. And just as she figured, only one man even made it to their goal, but with a casual thrust, the human was put out of its misery with a spear to the eye. Nor hopped down the rocks. The night was still young, and there were plenty of locals to put down. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My pad also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. New Home. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Fuck, master, it feels too good, Bella moaned, Lux's head between her thick thighs, lapping at the sopping slit. Over the past week, Lux had gotten the woman pretty close to her baseline mental state, with him completely replacing Voldemort as her object of devotion. She was still batshit insane, of course, but it wouldn't be Bellatrix less strange otherwise. He'd at least gotten her to switch to calling him master, or my lord, being referred to as her god. All day was becoming a little much, even for him. Still, he wouldn't mind the lesser beings of this world kneeling at his throne, worshipping as the god he was. It just felt weird to him for a person he'd been balls deep in for days to be calling him God. But he could put all those thoughts aside for another time when he didn't have such a beautiful womanhood in front of his face. Please, master, this dirty slut of yours doesn't deserve to be treated so well, she stammered through her convulsions, making him nip at her engorged clit, cutting off any further complaints. And who do you think you are, to decide how your master treats his slave? He mumbled before giving one of her heaving tits a tight slap while still feasting on the mature beauty's cunt. Lux couldn't get enough of Bella's juices. He didn't know why, maybe it was just a witch thing, but to Lux, eating out the woman's mature pussy had been the best meal he'd tasted since landing in this world. The heady scent of arousal filling the room only fueled his hunger. Deciding to spice things up with a little human transfiguration, Lux's now lengthened tongue slithered into Bella's deepest depths, her soft thighs locking his head in place like a vice as her rampant moans reached new heights. If he were a lesser man, he'd have likely passed out from the pressure she was putting on his neck. But he wasn't, and as his tongue circled the entrance to her precious womb, the overwhelming sensation sending Bella to a land of pleasure she could never have imagined, Lux reveled in the savory spray of girl cum he'd received for his efforts. Fuck, woman, you taste so good, Lux praised in between each flick of his still elongated tongue, making his way up her soft stomach, between the glorious globes of flesh, finally reaching her succulent lips. Bella seemed to finally get a hold of herself after coming down from the high of her climax. Please, master, allow me to tend to your needs now, she asked, nearly begging, making him reel in his tongue back to a normal length and rolling onto his back. Sure, I'll allow it. Now come and satisfy your master, Lux teased as Bella's seductive form sensually crawled across the bed until she was between his legs. Lux moaned as Bella let a long trail of saliva drip from her lovely mouth before taking the already erect cock in both hands, motioning up and down while teasing the underside of his tip with her tongue. Making Bellatrix his was the best decision he'd made so far, Lux thought as she moved her hands away, sheathing his cock down her pulsating throat. Bella would have happily used her mouth and throat to pleasure him for hours if he desired, but after a while of not showing any reactions and sending her a cocky smirk, she decided to escalate things, moving up to straddle his waist, pinning his shaft between his abs and her dripping slit. Master, I want you inside me. Fill me up with your seed, allow me to carry your child. Bella leaned down, purring into his ear, all while grinding her split lips along the underside of his dick. Deciding to fulfill his slave and perhaps future baby mama's wishes on her next motion, Lux angled his cock up, easily penetrating the waiting pussy. Laying back, Lux let the witch work her magic as she moved her hips up and down, side to side, her quivering quim doing its best to try and suck him dry. It didn't take the seductress long to receive his first climax. Between her skilled blowjob and grinding along his cock, he was already reaching his limits by the time she took him into her cunt. As she'd begged for, he didn't hold back, the tip of his dick knocking on her fertile womb before releasing his load. Lux's eyes widened for a brief moment. He felt it, he'd just impregnated his sexy slave. Then he shrugged, whatever, maybe he could put Rose to work as a babysitter in the future, he thought. For now, though, he wasn't done having his way with the mature witch, flipping her over with his cock still inserted before sending deep thrusts into the woman carrying his child. Just because Bella was now carrying his child, he wouldn't go easy on his sexy MILF, spending hours using her wonderful holes in all the ways he could imagine. Finally pulling out of his exhausted baby mama, Lux looked at his work with a satisfied smile. If he couldn't leave a woman in a quivering mess like the current Bella, it wouldn't be a job well done. Lux rolled out of bed, leaving the incapacitated Bella to get some much-needed rest. After cleaning himself off, he donned an extravagant pair of silk boxers he'd created. Stepping onto the modest porch attached to the small wooden cabin, he took in the morning air. The log cabin was a little something he'd cooked up to avoid sleeping in the shabby tent Rose currently occupied. But hey, he'd added some expansion and cushioning charms to make it livable. He wasn't heartless, after all. Summoning a glass of finely aged wine, Lux relaxed against the wooden railing. Gamp's law of transfiguration, you ask? That's something for mortals to worry about. While his divinity of creation was still weak, conjuring mundane things like food and drink from thin air wasn't a problem. Of course, they still ate a steady supply of freshly hunted game. He wasn't going to deny Aurora the satisfaction she felt feeding their dysfunctional little group. Seeing Rose dragging herself out of her tent with dark bags under her eyes, Lux gave her a happy little wave, only to receive a scowl and middle finger in return. You can turn that frown upside down. My plans are coming to fruition, and we'll be moving soon, Lux drawled, watching the sleepy girl perk up at his words. What plans? All you've done is laze around when not keeping me awake with your constant, nightly activities, Rose accused, making him smirk. It was true. He had been taking it pretty easy for the past week, but she didn't know about all the work his undead were putting in behind the scenes. Still, he'd gained some valuable insight into the essence of creation during his leisurely activities. Lux could only guess it was because Bellatrix was considered an important character, but either way, he'd gained a small amount of essence for stealing the Mad Witch away from her master. He also got a little insight into how the essence judged his feat. Because he took the easy path by brainwashing the psychopath, the amount he gained was far less than what he otherwise could have received. On top of that, his undead minions running around, making a ruckus, brought in a small but steady stream of essence. He figured he was gaining more from this because he was actually doing something rather than taking the easiest path of simply walking into the Lord's Keep and mind controlling all the higher-ups of this land. He wondered how much he'd have gained if he started at the bottom, gaining the allegiance of a small settlement and eventually leading a revolution with the small folk willingly joining his cause. But that would have put his plans of living a life of luxury on hold. Maybe he'd try out that path in another place after conquering Skagos. I wouldn't expect a little lass like yourself to understand my intricate machinations at play, Lux told the girl, who just rolled her eyes and went about her morning business. A new god's conquest. Thoric Magnar, heaving for air and covered in blood, pulled his axe from the skull of what must have been the 100th moving corpse of the night. Exhausted, Thoric moved behind his line of men, a fresh warrior replacing his spot as he slumped to the ground with his back to the wall. Now he could only lament not taking what the small folk claimed seriously. Days after his best man at arms should have returned, the truth made itself blatantly obvious. No man returned to the keep alive, and when none remained to leave out of fear, that's when the dead started pounding on their walls. He tried sending riders to houses Crowl and Stain, hoping they weren't in the same situation and could provide aid. But even if the messenger managed to make it, he figured his fellow lords would rather see his house fall than come to the rescue. Thoric looked to the sky. The dawn would soon break, giving them the respite they needed to last another day. For whatever reason, the whites would retreat at first light, dragging his fallen men back to the forests that were now a forbidden land. So many good years, all for it to come crumbling down around him, he lamented. His eldest son was torn apart the first night by their unexpected attack, and his second-born just the next. He couldn't have excused the two from the battle, not when every boy older than 2 and 10 was forced to man the walls. Now his only remaining heirs were but 7 named days, while the other was still sucking at the teat. Was this the gods' punishment? If it was, he didn't know what he'd done to deserve this. Seeing a section of the line of men collapsing, Thoric got to his feet, no time for him to continue bemoaning the whims of gods. With their lord back in the fray, his men's morale stayed strong enough to at least get through the night. Thoric slumped onto a bench, now back inside his keep after the battle. He looked around, finding more injured than the last, letting out a sigh at the depressing sight. The number of small folk seeking refuge that couldn't contribute to defense had been steadily decreasing. Not from the whites, but because their food stores couldn't handle the influx of mouths to feed. It was nothing new to the old lord. Before this long summer, they'd done what needed to be done to survive the harsh northern winters, and they'd likely continue to do so for years to come. That's if this wasn't the end for all life on Skagos. A new god's conquest. Rose crawled out of her comfortable enough tent, another night without getting enough sleep. She scowled looking at the stupidly attractive teen enjoying the morning air in nothing but his underwear, deciding to ignore him this time. Before she turned away, though, she couldn't help but take a peek at the manhood the flimsy cloth couldn't hide. He was a man where it counted, she thought, biting her lower lip. Her face quickly heated after noticing his knowing smirk. Fuck, she'd been caught. So she retreated back to her tent, not thinking she would be able to look anyone in the eye for the rest of the day. Seriously, could she really be blamed? She was nearly a woman, after all. Sure, she had very little experience, only pleasuring herself on occasion, too worried about getting caught by her bunkmates at the castle and dreading what her aunt would say. But now that she had a room, well, it was a tent to herself, and the constant sounds of pleasure resounding through the night, Rose couldn't help the dirty thoughts constantly running through her mind. Rose could barely admit to herself that she knew a silencing charm that would let her get proper rest, but the feeling of slipping a hand down her bottoms to the sounds of the two's arousing moans was too good to pass up. Just thinking about it now got her feeling a certain kind of way. And considering she would be spending the day in her tent, she decided she could take care of those naughty needs about now. Unfortunately, immediately after slipping off her trousers, Rose heard someone knocking on her tent post, making her scramble up and frantically pull her clothes back on. "Wakey, wakey, it's time to pack up camp and move into our new house," she heard Lux's annoying voice from outside. Grumbling, she grabbed her wand before leaving her tent, unable to meet the eyes of the man she'd been about to touch herself to. "So, where is this new home you've been talking about?" she asked. "Oh, you'll see," he replied, his voice colder than anything she'd heard him say before. Maybe because of all the shit she's been through, she was starting to have a bad feeling about today. Lux snapped his fingers, his cabin and her tent collapsing in on themselves before flying into a small briefcase that Bellatrix picked up. Like all the other magic she'd seen him use, she was again surprised by the ease he showed. Maybe she could get him to teach her some time. As she again took his offered hand, her surroundings changed, giving her a view of large wooden walls and similarly wooden structures within. That didn't keep her attention for long. She took a step back after noticing the warriors armed to the teeth with pitch-black skin and glowing golden eyes. The sight made her shiver. While they had a distinct human form, their features put her on edge. Before she could demand answers from Lux, her apprehension turned to horror. Rows and rows of unmoving bodies lined the walls. Turning to the person who presumably knew what was going on, she froze, noticing the cold smile he had on his face as he looked on. Lux, what's going on here?" she stammered, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. She'd seen death, but nothing like this. "You see, I figured the people occupying the house I wanted wouldn't take kindly to a peaceful eviction notice. Worry not, my dear, this will all be over soon," he explained, the nonchalant way he described this massacre making her lose any courage to ask further questions. Was this really the person she'd been enjoying her time bantering with? Now she guessed it made sense that he'd become so close with the Dark Lord's insane follower. But what was she supposed to do about it? Even with magic, she didn't like her chances of surviving in this foreign world. Was following a man that might be worse than Voldemort really her best option? Looking at him out of the corner of her eye, she decided it was probably safer here than out there alone. Still, she didn't have the courage to speak, simply following along as they approached the large gate. As they walked, the scattered corpses blocking the way simply vanished with a casual wave of Lux's arm before one of the larger warriors stepped forward. "Surrender the keep and submit to your new ruler," the low raspy voice somehow being heard clear as day even from a distance. Not receiving an answer, she saw Lux step forward, cracking his knuckles before drawing his wand. A large fiery beam silently flew from the tip, the largest use of the blasting charm Rose had ever seen, vaporizing the wooden gate off its hinges. Lux's warriors stormed the walls, and all she could hear were whimpering moans and murmurs of the others, and the Night King. She entered with Lux, noticing who she assumed to be the guards of this place, beaten and battered, barely able to make a stand as Lux's warriors held them at spear point. "So, you've finally shown yourself, warlock. Well, get it over with, and may the gods smite you down." One of the burlier men stepped forward, spitting on the ground. "Hey, I was going to give some of your men a chance to live, but not after what I've seen," Lux casually commented. "Kill them all," he ordered, and she could see the evil smirk on his face. "No," she managed to shout through the fear, making him raise a hand, all of his warriors stopping their advance. She didn't know what he saw, but she couldn't just let him slaughter the basically defenseless group right in front of her. He turned to her, an almost gentle look on his face, putting a hand on her shoulder that she nearly flinched from. "Rose, everything is not as simple as it seems," he claimed. "Kane, take Rose to the kitchens. If you still want me to spare them after, you can have it your way," Lux said before she was dragged off by the large man she figured was Kane. She didn't know what he was playing at, but without any other choice, not with the iron grip around her upper arm, she was dragged along. Maybe she should have run after all. Entering one of the buildings, the metallic smell in the air stung her nostrils. When she found what was waiting for her inside, she immediately emptied her stomach. She hadn't eaten breakfast, but what little was left from dinner, along with what felt like all of her stomach acid, was now on the ground. She couldn't believe her eyes. Children, younger than herself, pinned up like animals on the walls, their small body parts in pieces on the counters. Could people really do this? She wanted to believe this whole day was simply a nightmare. The people that did this were monsters. She was so out of it that she didn't even notice herself being led back to the courtyard where the people, no, monsters, of this place waited for her judgment. Well, he asked, making her look down. I don't think they should live, she choked out, tears running down her face. And as Lux's soldiers advanced, she didn't have it in herself to have sympathy for the men's pained cries, only mourning the death of so many children at the hands of these monsters. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6. Bloodraven. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Lux looked over the remaining crowd after his minions dragged away those he'd ordered executed, women and children, along with a few older teens. He'd quickly scanned their minds, finding that none had fallen too far into cannibalism and shouldn't be a problem later on. Rose was a mess. This would either break her or make her stronger. Either way, he didn't care. Lux didn't want to waste his time with a naive hero type, so this worked for his interests. Still, seeing the pretty girl crying, he let Aurora out, the golden puppy rushing over to comfort the young witch. Aurora seemed to have a soft spot for Rose. Hopefully, the little fluffball would help her get over it. Turning back to the crowd, Lux figured he should get things sorted so he could start the reconstruction of his new home. Alright, now that your lord is dead, who's considered in charge here? Lux asked the trembling group, making them back away now that the man responsible for their misery was directly addressing them. Of course, none of them could muster up the courage to speak, but after a moment, and likely because they'd noticed his irritated look, one of the middle-aged women stepped forward, head lowered, bowing at the waist. My lord, Lord Magnar's lady wife is in her quarters, she stammered. Well, someone go and bring her here. Lux rolled his eyes at having to deal with these small folk who could barely string a sentence together. Taking the opportunity, the woman eagerly skedaddled from his presence. Lux waited in a somewhat awkward silence until a different plain-looking woman carrying an infant in one arm and holding the hand of a young child with the other walked out of the keep, her only remarkable features being the massive mammaries the baby was nestled against. Lady Magnar, I presume, he asked as the woman scowled at him. Is this the part where you finish off my family's line? She bristled, making him smile. Lux didn't mind the woman's attitude, he was simply pleased that someone could at least look him in the eye while speaking to him. My lady, that depends completely on the choices you make. I do believe we could come to an arrangement that would ensure you and your children's survival past this day. I won't be warming your bed if that's what you're asking, Lady Magnar scowled, Lux's eye twitching at the accusation. Was this bitch serious? Being his bed warmer would be the highest honor the woman could possibly achieve in her insignificant life. Maybe he should bend her over right now in front of all her people. No, calm down, Lux. She's not worth it. She doesn't know better. Really, what could he expect? Sure, she might be a tad more educated than the rest of the savages of this land, but a savage is still a savage. Still, he probably wouldn't let that comment slide. Like he'd said, the woman was nothing special, but maybe he could get some use out of those fat tits of hers when he gets bored. Lux put on a fake smile. Of course not, my lady. I simply ask that you continue performing your duties to keep this house in running order, he stated matter-of-factly. Lux figured he'd have an easier time dealing with the remaining locals if he used their lady to convey his orders. And with a look into her eyes, he knew the fact that her children would blatantly be held hostage would prevent any funny business. The lady of the keep nodded, seeming to come to a decision. If I have your word that I and my children will go unharmed, then I would be agreeable to such an arrangement, she politely answered, making him think that she'd started to understand her position. May I know the name of our new esteemed lord, she continued, back to her earlier derisive tone, making him take back those thoughts. He paused, realizing he should probably come up with a surname. People of this world would assume he was a commoner or a bastard if he didn't have one. Okay, technically he was a bastard, but he figured it was a little different when your parents were gods. The name he'd been given was Latin for light, so he might as well stick with the theme. My name is Lux Tenebris. For your family's sake, I'm glad you made the correct decision, he said, receiving an odd, almost contemptible look from the lady. That's not a name I'm familiar with. Shall I presume you to be a Southern lord? She asked, unable to keep the venom out of her voice. Lux chuckled. You would be wrong, my lady, and nor am I from the east, for I am a god, descended from the heavens, with the mission to shepherd the lost onto the correct path, he proclaimed, receiving only crickets and the faint rustle of foliage in response. Rose scoffed next to him, and he was pretty sure he even heard Noir snort in amusement off in the distance. Fucking ye of little faith, Lux complained to himself. Fine, he'd just have to show these peons a miracle. He'd spent some time improving his healing magic while not having his fun time with Bella. He figured this next move would soon have these locals groveling at his feet, worshipping him in no time. Summoning his golden seal over one hand, Lux tossed it toward the injured small folk, the circle expanding above the group before golden light bathed the slightly panicked people. Wounds closed, limbs regrew, and malnutrition was cured in front of their disbelieving eyes. Lux decided to leave his new people to stew in their awe, giving his undead a few orders before getting to work rebuilding the wooden keep. A new god's conquest. Rose still didn't quite know how she felt about all of this. On one hand, Lux was responsible for countless deaths. On the other, they were the deaths of savage cannibals. After Lux handed her an enchanted necklace that translated to hand from the local language, she started to believe that, while brutal, what he did was necessary. It hadn't been long since the hostile takeover, but the people were already praising him as the benevolent god he claimed to be. An obvious lie told to gain power in this world that seemed to lack the magic of her own. But when a man walks in healing mortal wounds and handing out more food than they could even imagine, Rose couldn't blame the uneducated commoners for coming to that conclusion. The reverence they had for their new lord even extended to the people around him, and while she'd been used to the fame of being the girl who lived, this was on a completely different level. They wouldn't stop calling her Lady Rose, and the amount of clothes, handcrafted trinkets, and stitched embroidery she'd been gifted was starting to pile up. She had thought it odd that the remaining women and children so readily accepted him as their liege after he'd murdered their husbands and fathers, but this was a society that, for years, had been forced to cannibalize the young and elderly. The genocide their new lord committed was likely put to the back of their mind now that they could go to sleep with full stomachs. This was a part of the reason she'd been stuck accepting so many gifts. Food was freely handed out, and what she now figured out were his undead soldiers handled the majority of labor. There really wasn't much for the women and children to do. From what Rose had learned about this land she ended up on, Skagos was a large island with two other lords controlling similar amounts of land. Over the days, she'd noticed more and more of Lux's obsidian-skinned undead leaving what now could be considered a castle and not coming back. It was obvious to her, based on his actions and the way he held himself, that the mysterious teen, who only looked to be her age, wouldn't settle for this small plot of land he'd claimed. Rose could only hope that as few innocents as possible would be caught up in the violence and, hopefully, in the years to come, the prosperity created would make up for all the deaths. A new god's conquest. His long-laid plans were falling apart, and he knew exactly who was responsible. The song had already been sung, and everything was moving along as it should until a discordant note appeared in a land that otherwise wouldn't have played a significant role in the events meant to be. Now, the future was foggy, and he was sure the three with powers he couldn't see through were the sole reason. If it were simply the two witches, he was confident he could at least work around them, but it was the boy that put him on edge. Every time he tried to glimpse the cause of all his problems, whether through his greensight or using his animals, the child's piercing gaze seemed to reach him, even far off in his distant hideaway behind countless magical wards placed by the children he controlled. Hope wasn't completely lost, though. Westeros, then the world, would all be his. He just needed to lure the odd boy into his domain. A new god's conquest. Lux walked through the small town slowly popping up around his new castle. Refugees from the towns his undead left in ruins were still trickling in every day. Soon, the majority of the island's inhabitants would be centered in a single place, making it easier to control his subjects. Before the massacre, the large island was sparsely inhabited by no more than 50,000 men and women. Normally, the chaos of such a large population moving to a single area would cause countless deaths from famine and disease, but that wouldn't be an issue with his magic. Sure, he had to spend valuable time from his day handling all the small things, but he was already working on plans to decrease his workload. He had far more undead than he needed to keep the island on lockdown and move them to farming. More importantly, the untapped resources hiding in the many mountains would be his for the taking. His undead made excellent miners, not needing light to see or air to breathe. Yes, he could just snap his fingers and create all the food and mundane minerals he could want from thin air, but that would be his valuable time wasted when he could be doing better things. Just because he could snap his fingers and solve most problems, he still wanted the kingdom he was creating to be somewhat self-sufficient. Lux didn't have any grand plans of attempting to build an educated workforce. Unless he used all his time and a lot of magic, something like that would take generations. At most, he was likely going to import some advanced trades like smithing and masonry from Essos. That was his plan for the masses. For his private force, Lux had already started scouting for those with magical potential, finding a decent amount of wargs in his land. The ones he decided to teach magic would likely double as his bureaucrats, their payment for his teaching being eternal paperwork slaves. The only reason he hadn't started teaching yet was the fact that his essence of the Archmage would allow him to teach people of this world with magic potential magic that was actually useful. Sure, controlling an animal was cool and all, but when compared to wizarding magic, it seemed kinda lackluster. Not wanting to be the only one able to teach, he'd started working on a ritual that, in theory, would ignite the magical potential a person held in their blood, allowing them to naturally perform wizarding magic without his essence doing all the work. His testing would soon be done, and that meant he could put Bella to work as a professor. He just needed to test things out and ensure a person's natural abilities like warging would still be kept after the ritual. Reaching the outskirts of his town, Lux smiled to himself, seeing a crow perched on a tree. He figured it was about time to deal with his little voyeur. A new god's conquest. Weirwoods were an interesting magical life form, something he was looking forward to studying, Lux thought, standing in the god's wood behind his castle. But that could wait for another time. Now, he was going to have words with the man, or thing, that was trying to intrude on his privacy. Lux placed a hand on the tree's pale white face, his mind being pulled into a twisted mess that was the Weirwood's magical network, hearing an ominous laugh echoing through his mind. Boy, I didn't think you'd be foolish enough to enter my realm. You've only hastened your end. The voice he figured was that of the last Greenseer said, making him chuckle. I think you've got that wrong. I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. Hey, he'd always wanted to say that. The young are always so brash, the disembodied voice lamented, clearly overestimating himself. After those words, Lux could feel the thing trying to pressure his mind and soul. And he said, thing, because he could tell that the three-eyed crow wasn't human any longer. Instead, it was a corrupted conglomeration of souls bathed in hatred, all working toward a single purpose, taking over the world. Well, hold on 1 minute. Lux couldn't have any of that now. There was only room for one megalomaniac around here. Going on the offensive, Lux let his presence run wild, tearing through the flimsy domain created by the crow, sending it running with its tail between its legs, but not before finding its body's location. Leaving the tree's magical plane, Lux took a step, apparating into a vast cave, the walls lined with roots, a man looking like a withered husk sitting in the center. Nothing more than a mortal trying to play God, Lux sneered, walking up to the body and prying a withered eyelid open to get a deeper look into its memories. The thing definitely wasn't Bryndon Rivers anymore. He'd always thought there was something fishy about the three-eyed crow in the show and books. By now he'd figured out that the history of this world was closer to that shown in the books, and he'd never gotten to the end, but if the show was anything to go by, it wasn't Bran Stark that left the cave, and it was likely the crow that ended up winning the Game of Thrones. With a quick walk through the thing's mind, he found that it was another creation by the children of the forest, and surprise, surprise, it turned on them like the Night King, forcing them to do its bidding. Lux created a holy sword of light, stabbing the creature. The body disintegrated to ash while its tainted mess of a soul was purified out of existence. After getting that over with, he noticed small heads peeking out from the many branches, each with nut-brown skin and varied hair colors. One of the more feminine-looking ones with red and gold hair jumped down, bowing slightly at the waist. We thank you, human, for freeing us from the clutches of that monster. Lux rolled his eyes. Don't be so quick to thank me. I still haven't decided what to do with you lot, he said, making the little elf-like girl tilt her head. Twice, you've created threats that endanger this world, and one of them is still out there. Now the small girl was starting to back away. She didn't expect him to know the sins they'd committed. Lux knew that the children had a form of teleportation that allowed them to travel between the Weirwoods, but the magic cast by the three-eyed crow was still up, keeping them trapped in this cave. Human, you have no right to judge us. This is our land, she managed to muster up the courage to say, even knowing she was greatly outmatched. The person who so easily ended the life of their captor wasn't someone they wanted to mess with. Correction, it was your land, and now this is what's come of your species, left to hide away like pests from the predators of your own creation, Lux mocked, seeing the anger on their little faces before continuing. And now your fate rests in my hands. So tell me, do I really not have the right to judge? Lux found the many emotions crossing her face very amusing and cute. Almost like she was going through the 7 stages of grief until she finally landed on acceptance. What would you have us do? She asked, making him smile. You all shall willingly enter into a blood pact with myself. That way, I can make sure you don't end up creating the apocalypse or something worse on accident, Lux offered, getting a few shouts of anger from the children further back. The girl who had the task of talking to him also didn't seem pleased, but it looked like she knew when she was outmatched. My lord, will you give us a moment to discuss this? Lux nodded, the little elf hopping over to the others, talking in their weird language they probably thought he couldn't understand. Already, a few of the children were plotting his death or planning to backstab him when he least expected it. Lux made another light sword. His patience was running out. Targeting a male elf who was fervently pushing for them to try and kill him, he sent the blade flying, the little guy not even knowing what had happened until his head hit the ground. The others looked at him in horror and fear, all while Lux impatiently tapped his foot, urging them to come to a decision. Taking the hint, the group of 28 little elves approached, heads lowered. We will go along with your offer, the same female elf he'd been talking to said, her voice almost a whisper. Perfect. Now I'll just need each of you to hand over 7 drops of blood. Summoning a bowl and a knife, the collection went without a hitch, likely because the remaining elves didn't want to lose their heads. Unfortunately for them, the blood pact he had in mind wasn't as simple as he made it sound. You see, house elves were such useful creatures, and he wanted to get his hands on a few to handle the daily chores. He knew that the house elves from the wizarding world were normal enough looking before the dark ritual that bound them to wizards as slaves and was looking forward to seeing what effect, if any, being bound to a god would have on the elves of this world. The ritual was nothing complicated for him, and after it was done, it seemed the little fellas noticed something was wrong. Too bad, because now they were forever bound to him, their loyalty enforced by the binding ritual. House elves get. Today had been a productive day, he thought, patting the dust off his shoulder. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. Young Love. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Bellatrix sat relaxed in the castle's library, going over the lesson plans her master had given her, one of the useful little creatures he'd brought back rubbing scented oils onto her elegant feet. Leave it to her master, subjugating an entire race of magical creatures within months of arriving in this world to replace the house elves she'd been so accustomed to. Not to mention, these little ones were far more pleasant to the eyes than the disgusting things back in her world. Bella scowled, looking at the cute elf rubbing her feet. They already had an unworldly beauty to them, and after bonding with her master's magnificent magic, they'd only become more attractive. She had no doubt that a few would end up in his bed sooner or later. Interestingly enough, she'd noticed the nut-brown skin they seemed to share beginning to lighten in some and become darker in others. For the darkening ones, she could clearly sense their dissatisfaction at the role they'd been forced into. However, that dissatisfaction did seem to lessen when their strength and magic continually increased with the bond. She figured they'd get over it eventually. They'd soon realize that, even as servants of her lord, their position would be far above anything they could have ever reached on their own. She shook her head. Her only duty in life was to fulfill her master's desires, and if that meant tracking down even more of the little buggers to warm his bed, then that's what she would do. Bella placed a hand on her belly. She was already blessed with a gift she didn't dare imagine being worthy of as a lowly slave, but her master disagreed. While wrapped in his arms after a passionate night, he had told her, "There are many reasons I might leave a wife in the future, but a loyal slave will always have a place by my side. Remember that, my Bella, you're mine, now and forever." Remembering those words filled her with butterflies every time. She would never be able to repay her master for what he's done for her. She could only give herself entirely to the man she loved beyond all else. Just stealing her away from her previously unworthy master and fixing her mind would have been enough to ensure her loyalty, but this life growing inside her was something Bella didn't know she'd been missing all this time. She wasn't even showing yet, but the connection she felt was undeniable. Your tea, my lady, she heard from her side, the soft voice interrupting her pleasant thoughts. She giggled, looking at the male elf dressed as a little butler holding a silver platter with a cup of tea on top. It seemed her master was having some fun dressing up the servants, the few males wearing dapper suits while the girls were dressed as French maids. Bella took the offered cup, dismissing the butler and taking a long sip of the delicious drink before getting back to the lesson plan she still needed to go over. It actually ended up being extraordinarily fortuitous that her master found these magical creatures when he did. They'd been planning on teaching the few locals with magical talent what little wandless magic they could. Of course, with her master's genius, the ritual made controlling their magic far easier than what would be expected from witches and wizards just entering Hogwarts. Still, even though teaching wandless magic wouldn't be a hardship, having a magical focus would significantly speed up the learning process. Luckily, a strand of hair from the elves of this world made for a decent enough wand core. The locals, in particular, gained a strong connection with a wand made from the material. While playing professor definitely wasn't something she was looking forward to, especially for a bunch of medieval commoners who couldn't even read or write, her master had promised her a special reward as long as she didn't maim more than a few of her students. For that, Bella would become the best damn professor this world had ever seen. Just thinking about getting that reward had her rubbing her thighs together in anticipation. A new god's conquest. Aurora happily trotted along, taking in all the praises of the townsfolk with Rose at her side. She knew that the young witch was still coming to terms with how her father had handled this whole mess and figured dragging the girl along on her patrols would make her feel better. Sure, Aurora knew that her pops could be a baddie, but at the end of the day, she would always take his side. Besides, just her patrolling the town and helping those in need by drawing on her father's holy powers gave his subjects a better life than the vast majority of this world. Stopping, Aurora turned to a woman frantically running in their direction with a bundle of cloth held tight to her chest before dropping to her knees in front of them. Please, Lady Aurora, it's my babe, she's with fever, the young mother begged, making her nod and gently move aside the blanket with a paw, exposing a tiny red face, breaths labored. Aurora wouldn't let this innocent child suffer, and after connecting with her father's immense power, she laid a paw on the infant's head, the golden glow bringing her to perfect health. Bless you, Lady Aurora, I will never forget this kindness, the mother continued praising, making her frown. This gratitude should be directed to her father, the one lending his power to her. Aurora gave Rose a look. She knew what she was supposed to do, but the girl always seemed embarrassed to convey her words for whatever reason. Still, she batted the witch's leg, telling her to get on with it. Lady Aurora says it's by the grace of her father, Lord Lux, that your child was healed on this day. Albeit awkward, Rose at least got the message across, the woman fervently nodding. Yes, of course. I'll send my deepest prayers and gratitude to his grace. Satisfied, Aurora continued on her patrol, healing a dozen or so more locals, Rose acting as her voice. While Rose acted all bashful, Aurora knew that the girl was happy seeing the townsfolk prospering and hoped she would get back to herself soon. Finishing for the day, the two made their way back to the over-the-top castle her father had whipped up within a few days, surprised to see the mentioned person waiting at the gate. Rose was somewhat nervous. She'd been avoiding Lux as much as she could since moving from their original camp, but seeing those captivating black and gold eyes meeting hers, she knew she wouldn't be allowed to dodge him this time. The too cute for her own good wolf pup left her side, jumping into the arms of the too handsome for his own good teen, still looking at her, waiting for her to muster up the courage to approach. Hello, Lux, she bit the bullet, still managing to bugger up her greeting. Rose, let's go for a walk. I think we should clear the air between us. He held out a hand, flashing that gorgeous smile of his, making her look away, trying to hide the blush growing on her face. She could only nod, carefully taking his hand before the space around the three warped, depositing them in a lush, flowery meadow. By the landscape, she knew this shouldn't be far from the castle, however, the temperature was completely different from the cold they'd just been standing in. Like it, I've been working on wardstones to control the nearby climate, Lux asked her, knocking her out of her shock. Yeah, I have to admit, the constant cold and snow has been getting old, she smiled. Rose couldn't help but miss the relationship she felt she'd messed up by ignoring Lux. Her time spent with Aurora and the villagers really did hammer in how much better off they were under his rule. On top of the cannibalism, she'd heard horror stories of lords claiming the first night, human sacrifices to the heart trees, and luring passing ships to their destruction with false lights. Rose just didn't know how to go about fixing the relationship she'd mucked up. After all, she'd only had two real friends in her life before arriving on this new planet, and it had always been up to Hermione to patch up any fights their little group had. But now it seemed that Lux was taking the initiative, and she wouldn't blow this chance to return to being friends. Good. I'm glad, but let me be honest, talking about the weather wasn't the reason I brought you out here, he said, making her nod. She liked that he wouldn't be beating around the bush for ages. I figured, let me just say something first. She took a calming breath. I can't completely agree with what you've done, but I can see how much good has come of it. She trailed off, running out of what little courage she was able to muster. Lux stopped as she finally noticed that he'd never let go of her hand this whole time, some interesting things being felt in her stomach at the skin contact. He turned her to the side, making her face him as he placed a warm hand on her cheek, shivering at the pleasant feeling. Rose, you don't need to force yourself. Just know that all of this is to protect those I care about, and of course, you're one of those, Lux told her, and she nearly fainted right there. Was this a confession? She knew some boys had feelings for her, but with all the nonsense she had to go through each year, she never paid much attention to any of that. She shivered, thinking about the crush Ron clearly had on her during their last year. Yeah, that was never going to happen. Shaking those disturbing thoughts off, Rose got back to the current situation, Lux's hand on her cheek, looking deeply into her green eyes, not bothering to try stopping her blush this time. Could she imagine being romantically involved with this man? Yes she could. She didn't know how long they'd be stuck in this world, and she highly doubted any of this world's medieval men would be a good match for herself. Thank you, Lux, I care about you too, she managed to say, closing her eyes and tilting her head up. And like she'd been hoping for, she felt another pair of warm lips meeting her own, his arms wrapping around her back as he pulled her into a passionate embrace. This was far too easy, Lux thought, deepening the first kiss he'd stolen. He wasn't going to take this any further, rather, he'd enjoy his time making the attention-starved girl completely dependent on him. A new god's conquest, Bella huffed, walking through the castle's corridors, an almost perfect replica of Hogwarts. She'd just finished her first lesson with the unruly bunch and could only thank her master that the group was made up of older teens. For now, her master wanted those that would be of immediate use to be trained first. Hopefully, she could convince him to have someone else be put in charge of teaching the younger ones in the future. Entering the grand staircase, Bella waited for the stairs to align themselves, pleased that these ones were enchanted to take you where you needed to be. She'd gotten a few detentions back in the day for attempting to blow up the staircases when they would lead her to the completely wrong floor. Reaching what her master called his man cave, which was just where the Slytherin common room had been, she entered to find him at his workbench, carving runes into a stone. She didn't have the faintest idea of what was being created. Bella knew her master had likely been down here working all day, so she felt it was her duty to make sure he got the proper rest and relaxation he needed. Master, you've been working so hard. Allow me to help you unwind, she purred into his ear, his strong hand reaching up to run through her wavy hair. Yeah, you're right. I could use a break, he agreed, turning to wrap her in his arms, lips lowering to suck on her supple neck. Merlin, it felt so good to be in his clutches. Bella knew Lux was the strongest, and that just got her juices flowing. As he continued taking liberties with her body, she led him over to the room's lavish couch at the side, sitting him down before straddling his waist. Bella tore at the clothes, preventing her from touching her master's perfect body, knowing he could easily fix anything she ruined in her haste. Shoving her panties aside, she took his magnificent caramel cock in hand, grinding it along her already soaked sex, her master's fingers digging into the soft flesh of her ass. Just as things were starting to heat up, Bella scowled, the room's door flinging open as that fat bitch who was the wife of this land's deceased lord waddled in. Bella didn't know why her master hadn't just gotten rid of the woman who didn't seem to know her place, not showing her master the respect and reverence he deserved. She saw the woman put on a scowl of her own as she cleared her throat. If you could put this debauchery on hold for a moment, there are some concerns the small folk have that we need to go over, the bitch complained, flipping through a few sheets of paper. Carry on, I'm paying attention, her master mumbled, his mouth latched onto one of her light pink nipples. TCH, do you think I want to stand here watching this depravity, the bitch said, making her finally lose it. Standing up, her sexy nipple popped out of her master's mouth, and that more than anything enraged her, knowing that her master's time using her body was cut off because of this bitch. Bella grabbed a handful of the shorter woman's mousy brown hair, bending down to look her in the eyes. What was her name again? Jera or something. Whatever, it didn't matter. I've had enough of your drivel. I think it's about time you learned your place, she growled, making the woman tremble and try to back away. My lady, I apologize for the offense, Jera immediately backpedaled, remembering the power difference at play. Bella didn't care about any of the woman's pleas, dragging her over to the couch and shoving the bitch down between her master's spread legs. Now, you'll learn how to properly use that bitchy mouth of yours, she grinned at the trembling woman. My lord, you promised I wouldn't have to warm your bed, the woman decided to plead to her master. And you would be right, her master said, making her dejectedly frown while the woman at his knees sighed in relief. But I never claimed you wouldn't be punished for that venomous tongue of yours, he continued, Bella's wicked grin returning. Bella knelt behind the mouthy bitch before tearing her blouse down the middle, the outrageous tits with equally large, brown nipples popping out, the overly large breasts sagging to the woman's belly button. She knew that the woman wouldn't know how to please her master, so she'd just have to take things into her own hands, literally. She internally laughed at her quip as she hefted the large sacks onto her master's crotch. Her master groaned as his cock, already lubed up with her pussy juices, disappeared between the bobbing tit flesh. The woman was nothing to look at, not when her master had a beauty like herself at his disposal, but she knew that degrading the woman was exciting enough for the both of them. And like she thought, it didn't take long for her master's first climax as she pressed the woman's tits to his base, his tip just poking out as she angled his release to cover the bitchy woman's face. Now she should understand her position, Bella thought. Leave now, Bella ordered, satisfied with seeing the woman's face covered in cum and tears as she hastily left the room. Bella, after that display, you better believe I'm nowhere near satisfied for the night, her master told her, making her smile. She knew her master was insatiable to begin with, and she happily vanished what little clothes remained on her body, climbing back onto his lap. Yes, of course, master, you know I'd never leave you unsatisfied, she moaned, the tip of his cock placed against her soaked slit. Dropping down, Bella let out a scream of pure rapture. No matter how many times she took the wonderful manhood into her body, she couldn't get enough. After finishing once with his slave riding his lap, Lux bent the sexy witch over the corner of the couch, immediately sheathing himself back into the cum-filled cunt from behind. Watching Bella put the previous lord's wife in her place really got him going. Lux really didn't care about the woman's attitude, but it was entertaining to watch Bella get upset. Today just happened to be the day that Bella's patience ran out to the benefit of his pleasure. He had to admit, those gigantic tits felt pretty nice around his dick. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days, so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 11 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. Shipwreck. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Gwenel hummed a happy tune, tossing ingredients in a pot for tonight's stew, smiling at her two darling girls carefreely playing with their dolls. Before the new Lord, a true god, descended onto the mortal plane, blessed them with his rule, she would have never imagined enjoying a full belly every night and allowing her little ones to behave as children should. Her daughters were fast reaching womanhood, and not too long ago she'd been worrying about them getting stolen away one night. Now, however, stealing wives was put to an end by the mercy of his grace. The first men who tempted the new law were immediately hunted down by the Lord's warriors and hung in the town square. Gwenel heard the door open, turning to see her oldest child and only son walk in. She'd been worried about the lad. He hadn't taken well to the loss of his father, and she feared he may be bitter toward their Lord and Savior. Of course, she too grieved the loss of her husband, but she was only fond of him as much as possible, considering she, like her mother before her, had been stolen as the man's wife. She had no true love for the man. The only good thing from their pairing was the children she loved with all her heart. Her son, though, looked up to his father as a role model, and she feared he'd soon go down the wrong path. Gwenel frowned. Her son had brushed past her without so much as a word. She cleared her throat. Eric, what have you been up to today? Quote. Nothing. Children these days, she scoffed. Have you heard the news? His Grace will be opening the divine realm to those in need of work, she asked her son, who was still trying to ignore her. Why would I care? He replied, making her brows furrow. You should care so you can get off your lazy rear and be a productive member of this town, she scolded, beginning to tire of this boy's attitude. Why bother? Food is freely handed out, her son said. The Lord blessed us with these gifts to get us through hard times. Now it's our turn to prove our own worth. It was our so-called Lord that put us in these hard times to begin with. He burst out, making her pause. Gwenel couldn't believe her ears. How could a child of her own speak such blasphemy? She knew what she had to do. It would break her heart, but she wouldn't tolerate this heresy under her roof. Cries of pain rang out from the small house, and she was sure all the neighbors would hear. They would understand though. This wasn't the first time an unruly child had to be taught a lesson. As her wooden ladle continued slapping her child upside the head, his cries for mercy went unheard. The Lord giveth, and he can taketh away, she shouted between each strike, her son whimpering in the corner. Luckily she'd sent her daughters to their rooms so they wouldn't have to see such a sight. Okay, Ma, I'll go and work for our Lord, her son pleaded, making her stop mid-swing. Gwenel put on a pleasant smile and patted her son's bruised cheek. Good boy. Now go and get some rest before supper, she praised. She went back to the pot of stew, picking up the merry tune she'd been humming. She'd done the Lord's work today, she thought to herself. A new god's conquest. Bellatrix rubbed her bulging belly. Any day now, she could go into labor, and she couldn't wait to bless this world with a child from the divine loins of her master. Bella could already imagine it. This would just be the first, and soon she'd be able to revive her fallen family. Her master had already promised her that their children could take her family name if she desired, not the damnable Lestrange, but rather the noble House of Black. She'd do her best to single-handedly repopulate her house. Besides her fantasies of the future, Bella stretched, feeling better than ever even while so heavily pregnant. Over the months of carrying their child, she'd noticed herself changing. She was physically stronger, her magic had become far more potent, and what she was most pleased by was her ability to better keep up with her master's lust. She smiled. Being able to spend an increasing amount of time in her master's bed had begun driving Rose crazy. It was obvious that the young girl was hopelessly in love with her master, and to her disappointment, her master never took things beyond the occasional chaste kiss. Of course, there was no need for her master to seek other lovers, not when she was only growing into her own sexuality. Even with a belly bloated with child, her master only seemed more attracted to her new motherly figure. Still, she knew that she wouldn't be able to keep her master to herself forever, but she could at least enjoy it while it lasted. Even with all the time spent satiating his lust, her master was, by no means, neglecting his duties as the lord of the unworthy locals. The advancements he'd made with the society that was nearly in the Stone Age were nothing short of astonishing. And that wasn't even mentioning the revolutionary magical knowledge he'd stocked the libraries full of, the students progressing far beyond what a graduate of Hogwarts would. Just thinking about her master's greatness got her feeling a certain type of way, figuring she could arrange a special gift for tonight's activities. Leaf, Bella called out to thin air, the pale-skinned beauty with vibrant red, brown, and gold hair appearing with a pop. How may I serve, mistress? The little elf politely bowed. Your presence will be required in his grace's chamber tonight, Bella said, noticing just the slightest tremble run through the elf's petite body. Yes, mistress. Is there anything else I can be of service with? Leaf asked, making Bella smile. She did love how obedient the little creatures had become. That will be all for now, Bella waved off, the elf leaving with another pop. Tonight would be fun. A new god's conquest. Lux sat on his golden throne in the center of the great hall, awaiting the arrival of a group of prisoners that his undead commanders had captured. He ran a hand through the soft coats of Nor and Aurora, the two wolf pups purring as much as wolf pups could. Before the two little girls could fall asleep, their heads perked up at the same time, sniffing the air and noticing the arriving prisoners just as the doors to the great hall were pushed open. An eyebrow rose as Lux watched his undead usher in an all-female group wearing ragged furs. He quickly scanned their surface thoughts, and the name of a tall blonde caught his attention. He hadn't expected his actions in this world to have such an effect on the greater surroundings already. The blonde's name was Val, and unless it were a coincidence, she should be the sister of Mance Raider's wife. Other than Val, the only other woman of the 10 that caught his eye was a timid-looking foreigner. If this were his past life, he'd assume the girl was Asian, but since this was Planetos, the woman, who, even covered in dirt and grime, was clearly a beauty, must be from Yt. You are in the presence of Lux Tenebris, god of holy light and eternal darkness. Kneel before his grace. A girl in black robes cried out from the side. Lux rolled his eyes. This was Bella's doing. His favorite slave insisted on having one of her students on standby as a court announcer. The wildlings scowled while the Ytish girl knelt, clearly surprised. Lux guessed the young woman was more surprised that the voice she heard came from her mother tongue, the student wearing one of his enchanted translation necklaces. We kneel for no one of the older wildlings said, spitting on the ground. One of his undead whipped the woman in the back of the knees with his spear, making the woman unwillingly kneel with a cry of pain. His other minions immediately did the same, though less painfully, forcing those still standing to their knees with a strong hand on their shoulders. Lux rose from his throne, the little wolves hopping down too, before walking over to the kneeling group. As he paced back and forth, deciding their fate, he thought about all the opportunities he could make out of this. First was the fact that he finally knew the exact year from the mind of the Yetish woman, 287 AC. It was honestly further back than he'd expected. Don't most fan fictions with this plot start closer to canon? Well, whatever, his life wasn't a fan fiction, so he'd just go with it. Besides, there were some fun plans he could put into motion with so much time on his hands. Soon, he'd be expanding beyond this dreary little island. Yes, it will be perfect, Lux thought, rubbing his hands together with an evil smile, not noticing the aura he was giving off putting the prisoners on edge. Ahem, he cleared his throat. He told himself that he'd try to stop cartoonishly plotting. Clearly, he was addicted and it wouldn't be so easy. Now, what should I do with you lot? Lux asked himself. The group of wildlings just growled and grumbled. The Yetish girl just had a blank look on her face. Aside from the first time hearing her language, her facial expression hadn't changed. Even without going through her memories, Lux could guess that a beauty so far from home wouldn't be having a pleasant time. I have a mind to simply have you put to the sword. After all, I'm sure a bunch of savage raiders wouldn't follow my rule of the land, Lux nonchalantly pondered, making a few of the wildlings squirm. If you can send us back, she's the daughter of a chiefess. I'm sure you would be rewarded, one of the smarter women bargained, the others giving her a dirty look. Presumably, they'd rather die than negotiate with someone they considered a kneeler. Oh ho, now that's something. At least one of you is somewhat intelligent, Lux mocked, and he was sure he'd have been attacked by now if not for the spears at the women's necks. Take the wildlings to the dungeons, he gestured, the undead following his orders, leaving him alone with the woman from Yeti. He'd visit his captured wildling princess another time. You may rise, Lux offered a hand. The woman hesitated but eventually took it, pulling herself to her feet. Standing a head shorter than him, Lux smiled at that. Okay, yes, he was still bitter about the fact he was still a growing boy. Tell me your story, he gently placed a hand on her soft cheek, some light returning to her eyes at his touch. It was a tragic story, of course. Lux simply let the woman he now knew as Yaling get her anger at the world off her chest, letting her cry in his arms when she needed to. Simple skin contact while channeling his holy light was enough to keep her worries at bay. Yaling had been sold into slavery, and her most recent owner was the captain of a Tyroshi slave vessel. Obviously, she wasn't put to work as a sailor, instead warming the captain's bed and those of anyone he allowed. Lux knew the girl was a broken husk of her former self, and if it wasn't for his presence, she wouldn't have been able to get her story out. He'd been wondering what changes he'd made that ended up with Val getting captured. From Yaling's story, he had a pretty good guess. After taking control of the island, Lux had his minions destroy any of the false lights lining the shore that the locals used to lure in ships. In the normal timeline, the slaver's ship would have probably wrecked before making it beyond the wall. How unlucky for them to have ended up doing the same on the way back anyway. Looking at the broken woman, Lux decided he could fulfill his yearly good deed. Tell me, Yaling, what would you give for me to take all your pain and suffering away? Lux asked, making her raise her head to look him in the eyes. Anything, my lord, she said through her tears. And if I want you in your entirety? Lux questioned. Then it'll be yours, my lord. Lux grinned. He may be doing a good deed, but he'd still take advantage of the desperate woman. Lifting her chin, Lux placed a light kiss on his newest slave's lips, golden light surrounding her form. The dirt and grime vanished, what little scarring disappeared, and any hidden injuries healed. At the same time, his improved mental magic sealed away her time spent as a slave. She'd still remember the years, but it would be like a listener hearing it as a story without any of the intimate pain to go along. Again, tears fell from her eyes, though this time he could tell they were filled with relief. The jade beauty was unable to contain herself, latching onto her savior like a limpet as he gently caressed her lithe back. A new god's conquest. Down in his man cave, Lux toiled away on another of the designs he would soon be implementing. This one, in particular, was that of an enchanted flying ship. He had already had a few of the base ships put together, now all that was left was to create the complicated runic matrices. Master, I have something special planned for tonight. The seductive purr of his favorite slave distracted him from his work. He had done enough for the day, he thought. Besides, he was genuinely curious about what Bella was up to. Putting his tools aside, he wrapped the temptress in his embrace before teleporting them both onto the lavish mattress in his chambers. Lux snapped his fingers, their clothes vanishing. He was ravenous at the moment and didn't want anything to get in the way. Trailing a finger from Bella's lovely lips, he paused at her milk-filled breasts. He swore those things had nearly doubled in size by now. Continuing, he traced along her exceptionally round belly. The fact that his child was growing there only increased the attraction he felt toward the lovely woman. As he finally reached her sacred garden, a knock on the door interrupted his fun, making him scowl. "Were you expecting someone, my dear?" Lux asked, still gliding a finger along Bella's glistening folds. "NNGH, yes, master. It seems my gift to you has arrived," she moaned her answer before hopping out of bed, sexily sashaying over to the door. Bella opened the door, pulling in Leaf, dressed in her little French maid outfit. The petite elf did her best to avert her eyes from the scene, but all that did was increase his anticipation for what was to come. "Well, master, how do you like your gift?" Bella asked, having dragged the timid elf over to the foot of the bed. "I couldn't have asked for a better one," he praised, raking his eyes over the light-skinned elf's form. Bella started with the girl's top, slowly peeling the clothes down to reveal an almost completely flat chest topped with 2 tiny pink pearls. The juxtaposition of the little elf next to the ridiculous mommy milkers Bella had out on display was a sight to behold, his cock rising to full mast. Even without Bella, Lux didn't discriminate between chest sizes. Any size got his wood to rise, and all that. On the bright side, the interdimensional FBI wouldn't be knocking on his castle gates, considering the elf was about 200 years old. Bella turned Leaf around to face herself as the outfit reached the elf's tiny waist. She finally peeled the outfit over the surprisingly bubbly rear, the clothes pooling at the elf's feet. Now that everyone was completely nude, Bella dragged the still quiet as a mouse elf over to lay on the mattress. "Master, let me get you ready. We wouldn't want you to break the girl, now would we?" Bella said, reaching for his manhood before taking it between her soft lips. He'd learned that the elves of this world only copulated for the purpose of reproduction. On top of that, they'd only attempt reproduction when it was foretold. Something about it being whispered in the wind, or some bullshit like that. Hey, Lux wasn't complaining, not when he got to pop the cherry of this gorgeous little elf. After a few minutes, Bella seemed satisfied with the state of his saliva-covered cock, moving to the top of the bed and pulling Leaf into her lap. "Come, claim the fruits of your labor," Bella urged. Lux, of course, wasn't going to refute, moving to kneel between his elf's legs held wide open by Bella, rubbing his tip against the tiny hairless slit. "My lord, please be gentle," Leaf begged, making his rock-hard cock twitch. Leaf didn't know it, but those words really did it for him. But he would be nice enough to make her first time as painless as possible, slowly pressing into the virgin canal. As much as he loved fucking the seductress that was Bella, there was just something empowering about taking a woman's first time that he couldn't get anywhere else. Not to mention the insanely tight grip doing its best to wring him dry, as if it wanted his seed at all costs. Lux couldn't get enough of the elf's cute little squeals and moans as his slow thrusts worked deeper and deeper. Despite the little cunt's best efforts to milk his dick dry, he was able to hold back until Leaf noticeably shuddered, not able to hold back a loud moan of her own. With the little elf receiving the first orgasm of her life, Lux plunged as deep as he could get, unloading the first climax of the night. "Master, it's my turn now," Bella declared, flipping on top of the panting little elf, her dripping slit now in front of his still hard shaft. It seemed watching him claim the girl's virginity really got his slave going. Lux wouldn't deny his loyal baby mama's needs, lining his cock up and sending it home, Bella's moans filling the room. "Damn, woman, this shit really turned you on, huh?" Lux teased, the obscene amount of her ejaculation soaking his balls, not even minutes into his thrusts. "Master, that wasn't my orgasm," Bella deadpanned, making him freeze. "Well, shit, it seems he fucked the woman into labor. Aight, I'ma head out. I'll send in some elves to help," Lux said, vanishing from the room. Yeah, he wasn't going to deal with that nonsense. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9. Preparations. Disclaimer. I own nothing but my original characters and works. All other characters and worlds belong to their respective owners. Lux reappeared in his chambers after his elves assured him that any mess left from the birthing had been thoroughly cleaned up. "Master, would you like to hold our daughter?" Bella asked, holding out the small bundle. Lux smiled. His slave was such a thoughtful woman, at least to him. To everyone else, she was still the same hateful bitch. Taking the little one into his arms, he expected to see something resembling a wrinkled potato. Instead, his child looked like a beautiful little doll with a full head of dark hair, olive skin, and gray eyes like her mother. On top of that, the infant seemed remarkably active, curiously looking at him and her surroundings. Well, whatever. He knew any children coming from his divine balls were going to be exceptional. You're going to be a little hellion, I just know it, he baby talked, lifting his little girl up and receiving cute giggles from the funny faces he made. Well done, my Bella. She's absolutely gorgeous, Lux said, making his loyal slave beam with pride. What's her name? He asked. Delphine Black. A beautiful name. I'll let you and little Delphi get some rest, he told her, returning the baby to her mother and turning away. Lux stopped before apparating away, feeling Bella's hand grab his own. Please, master, stay with us, she begged, giving him those slightly manic puppy dog eyes. He guessed he could do that much for the woman who just birthed his first child, Lux thought, sliding into bed beside his baby mama. Running a hand through Bella's hair, he watched his daughter slowly fall asleep with a smile on his face. Bella didn't last much longer either, nodding off with her head resting on his shoulder. Even with an enhanced body from carrying his child, the labor still seemed to take a lot out of his slave. But Delphine, Lux was pretty sure he remembered something about a shitty Harry Potter sequel with Delphine as the daughter of Bellatrix and Voldemort. Either way, that wouldn't have been possible in the Omniverse his Bella came from, not when the Voldemort he'd gained the memories of had made himself into a eunuch. Lux scooped his sleeping daughter out of her mother's arms, handing the tiny bundle over to one of the elves on standby. They'd bring little Delphi to the nursery and take the best care of his precious daughter. Lux also popped away from his sleeping slave after handing off his daughter. He had plans to advance. It was time to let the people of this world know that a new god had descended. A new god's conquest. Like a ninja from one of those cartoons her imbecile of a cousin would watch, Rose crept through the castle's halls, heading for the room she knew had been turned into the nursery. Reaching her destination, she spotted two elves dressed as little butlers standing guard. She wasn't worried about them. They'd just ignore her as they carried out their duties. Rose opened the door, spotting a maid elf in each corner of the room. They turned to her, and she placed a finger over her lips, signaling them to be quiet. She tiptoed up to the crib, finally laying eyes on the daughter of the man she was falling in love with and the woman who previously wanted her dead for being the fated enemy of her lord. Sure, Rose still didn't get along with that bitch at all, but now that the woman was infatuated with her new master, she didn't have to worry about being cursed in the back. If it weren't for Lux convincing her that Bellatrix was nothing more than a tool controlled by Voldemort that he'd freed from the grasp of the Dark Lord, Rose would have never let her off for the murder of her godfather. Even now, she hadn't forgiven the psychopath, but she at least didn't wish for her death. Rose scowled. The baby was so absurdly adorable that it made her ovaries twitch. She wanted one of her own. Unfortunately, with her minuscule knowledge of seduction, none of her attempts to advance things with her overly handsome savior seemed to work. While lost in her baby fever, a hand grabbed her shoulder, making her jump back with a hiss. Bellatrix. Ahem, I seem to have gotten turned around on the way to my room, Rose lied. Bellatrix smiled a knowing smile, clearly not believing her convincing excuse. Tisk, there's no need to hide your jealousy, little Rose. It's only natural. After all, delivering the child of a god is a blessing of the highest degree, Bellatrix told her, making her roll her eyes. Rose just ignored all the god nonsense, but even though she wouldn't admit it, she was right about her being jealous. TCH, you've won this time, bitch. But mark my words, Lux will be mine one day, Rose swore as Bellatrix's eyes narrowed. Rose noticed the dark flash pass through the older witch's eyes, making her shiver. All this time spent watching Bellatrix act as the loyal servant made her forget how vicious the woman truly could be. Bellatrix lightly stroked her neck with one of her graceful hands, her trembling only increasing. You'll watch that dirty mouth of yours around my child, Bella said, and she could only nod at those words. Rose really didn't want to get on the bad side of the crazy lady, who, by all means, was far closer to Lux than she was. Good. I'm glad we could come to an understanding, Bella said, her menacing glare flipping like a switch, a pleasant smile back on her face before she turned to leave the room, leaving Rose standing there in a daze. A new god's conquest. Val stewed in her rage. She and her group had been thrown into the dungeons, and if it weren't for the routine meals, she would have thought they'd been forgotten. She was of the free folk. She couldn't believe she'd been captured twice by the kneelers. Val perked up, hearing the steady footsteps from down the hall. This wasn't the time for their normal meals. She readied herself. This might be her chance at freedom. But alas, it didn't seem to be so. 6 of the fully armored warriors that had captured her in the first place were heading for her cell. With their flesh completely covered, the only thing making her believe they weren't statues was the eerie glow from the slits of their helms. It made her shiver, reminding her too much of the tales of the others. The warriors didn't say anything, 2 of them entering her cell and hoisting her up by the arms. She could only follow. Even if she had the strength to fight off the fully armed men, then what? She didn't even know the way out of this outrageously large castle. So she was dragged along, and even then, she couldn't help but marvel at her surroundings. She'd heard that the kneelers south of the wall lived in large castles, but this was insane. Val guessed that this castle alone was larger than the largest free folk settlement she'd ever seen. Sure, that wasn't saying much, but still, this castle alone could house her entire village with plenty of space left over. Finally, though, they seemed to arrive at their destination, the warriors knocking on a door before being ordered to enter by a familiar voice. The man claiming to be a god leisurely reclined behind a desk, gesturing for her to enter while the others left them alone. This might have been her best chance for freedom. Left alone, she might have been able to defeat this man. But she didn't. This man had her hackles raised. Something was telling her that in this situation, she was nothing more than prey before a predator. He smiled at her, and something told Val that he knew exactly what she'd been thinking. Tell me, Val, what would you do to see your people uplifted from the ragtag bunch of raiders they are? He broke the silence, the ridiculous words he spoke making her forget to question how he knew her name. I'd do anything, but what does that matter to a kneeler like yourself? She didn't know what this man was up to, but she was starting to get a bad feeling about this whole thing. It matters when I've been wavering on whether to wipe your people clean off the board or to bring them along to prosper with the rest of the civilized world, he said, making her eyes go wide. Was this man serious? Val didn't know why, but she was taking the threat seriously. Even when, for thousands of years, the crows tried to do the same but time and time again failed, she felt the man standing before her was different. Like I'd trust the words of a kneeler, she scoffed, trying to put up a brave front. The so-called god didn't respond, instead getting up from his seat to stand before her. She tried, but she couldn't keep the smirk off her face, seeing that she stood a good few inches above her captor. Again, he seemed to know what was going through her head as he rolled his eyes. Still, even with the height advantage, there was just a certain presence the man had about him, and she couldn't even react when he placed a hand on her face. Such beauty. Fortunately, the slavers had enough restraint not to taste the goods, he said, making her scowl and try to move his hand away. She couldn't, though, he was too strong, and all she could do was stew in her rage at being reminded of her capture. Enough games. What are you trying to get from this? She questioned, starting to tire of whatever this man was playing at. As I said, you have the chance to see your people prosper, that is if I see fit to do so. And as I said, why would I trust the words of a kneeler? First off, I kneel before none. And second, would you trust the words of your husband? He asked, anger building in her chest, understanding the meaning behind his words. As if I'd take a kneeler for a husband, she gritted out, seething at his knowing smile. From what I know, the woman's consent doesn't mean much in your culture. What was it called again? Ah, yes, stealing. Isn't that right? Her captor teased, almost making her go on the attack. Was this really going to happen? She didn't think she could stop him if he wanted to steal her. But, no, she was of the free folk. She wouldn't submit without a fight. Just as she was getting ready to fight to the death, her captor backed away. I'll let you think about it. For now, as long as you behave, I'll set you up in a room more fitting of my future bride. Val didn't know if those words were serious or not, but all she could do was prepare herself for what was to come as she was led through the castle by the same warriors. It was true that she would be obligated to take her captor as her husband if he were able to best her. But there was a reason women like her weren't constantly harassed by prospective suitors. They might be able to steal them for a night, but then they'd have to sleep with one eye open every night to avoid getting a dagger to the throat. She'd be ready when the time came. Lux smiled to himself after his captive left. Val was a true Nordic beauty, tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. He couldn't wait to have her to himself. A new god's conquest. Lux walked through his super-secret evil lair with Nora on his shoulder and Aurora walking at his side. Things were going well, in part due to his decision to train up a group of the locals as wizards and witches. They could handle the small stuff that he couldn't be bothered to do. Even having taught them for just over a year, Bella had told him that even the slowest learner was on the level of a Newt graduate. This was, of course, only possible because he was a dirty, no-good cheat. You see, Voldemort had tried to study Ravenclaw's diadem, but nothing ever came of it. Maybe that was why the Dark Lord decided to taint the precious artifact with his putrid soul fragment. Either way, Lux was in a completely different realm compared to the noseless bastard, so creating an enchantment to increase a person's learning speed was a piece of cake. Getting back to his work, Lux checked his progress one last time on his newest creation, a beautiful golden kimono accented with silver flowers and a matching silver obi. The dress was obviously meant for his newest slave. Soon he'd be sending people out to spread his name across this world, and he was sure that the Jade Beauty would make an excellent saintess. Okay, he knew that Yi was meant to represent ancient China, but he really liked kimonos, so sue him. Besides, there was no one to call him out on it anyway. Lux nodded his head. The dress was a magical work of art. Anyone wearing it would be the most protected person in the world. After all, he couldn't allow any harm to come to his saintess. Moving on, Lux inspected the row of a dozen triple-masted galleons, all decorated with the banners he was planning to use for his kingdom, the side profile of a silver wolf's head on a field of gold. He'd have gone for larger ships if the ports of this world could handle them. However, it didn't matter much considering the interior of the ships had been expanded to the point that an army could comfortably be transported in each one. Nor swatted at her father's head for not putting her majestic self on the banners. She narrowed her eyes at her sister happily trotting along as if she hadn't slighted her. Sure, the silver wolf on the banner wasn't modeled after her golden sister, but at least there was gold on the banner. Now, Nor. Don't think I've forgotten about you, her father soothed her anger, giving her good head pats. Well, she supposed she could forgive him just this one time. After soothing his darling wolf pup, Lux spread his magic sense across the many enchantments of the ships, deciding that everything looked up to par. All that was left to do was insert the wardstones that would power the vessels. Lux hadn't skimped when it came to these bad boys. They'd cut through water like it wasn't there, and that was if the captains even wanted to stay on the seas, considering they could sail just as fast through the air. As the cherry on top, the magical cannons lining the ships would quickly end anyone who inevitably had eyes for his creations. It might seem like he'd spent most of his new life working on his enchantments, considering his lair was filled to the brim with his creations, the lowest leveled ones still being on the level of the Hogwarts founder's artifacts. But that was far from the case. He'd only been given the basics of light magic, along with a spell circle that didn't provide much enhancement to any of his casts. Now, however, he'd made his own seals. Each took the form of a wolf's head, made from countless runic engravings, one golden and the other abyssal black. He'd had to work with what he had to create a set of spells to work with his powers of darkness. His stingy parent, Erebus, hadn't given him anything to start with. So yeah, he'd made significant progress with his magic, and now he was just waiting for the first set of fools to make him use it. Reader interaction fuels me, so leave a comment or review and the collective dopamine hits will probably have me pumping out more chapters. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. My Pat charges every 30 days so it doesn't matter which day of the month you join. My Pat also required Discord to view content, so if that's something you don't want to deal with, join my Subscribe Star. Link. subscribestar.com/CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 8 comments 0 vote. Saintess. Beautiful readers of mine, could you please leave a review? I want to unlock the stars for my story. Fluttering her eyes open, she smiled at the feeling of the soft golden silk wrapped around her. Yaling never dreamed she would return to a life of such opulence. The years spent as a lowly slave had long since beaten any hope out of her mind. But that was before meeting her new lord, a god walking among mortals. Yaling knew that others in her situation would believe her lord to be a fraud, assuming him to be nothing but a powerful sorcerer. Yet deep in her heart, she knew the truth. Yaling knew what a man pretending to be a god looked like. After all, she came from a line of men claiming to be gods. But that was simply to control the commoners. She knew none wielded even a fraction of her lord's power. Of course, she'd told her lord about her lofty background on one of the many occasions he'd taken out of his day to speak with her. That fact alone always made her heart speed up. Her lord wasted his precious time with someone who should be nothing more than his lowly servant. But that wasn't the case. Her lord always seemed interested in hearing about her life in Yi before she was sold into slavery. Yaling felt her stories were nothing special. After all, she was a pampered princess with no grand tales of adventure to mention. Up until the fated day that her uncle betrayed her father, she had lived a worry-free life, never expecting things to take such a drastic turn. That was in the past, she had to remind herself. Now, her only duty was to serve her lord, for without his blessing she would be nothing but a husk of her former self, only waiting for the sweet embrace of death. Okay, Yaling, enough monologuing. Today's the big day, she told herself, needing the little boost to leave the comfy sheets that tried luring her back to the realm of dreams. Yaling cutely yawned, rolling out of the large bed and stretching her fatigued muscles. She'd taken her training seriously. Her lord had told her about his grand plans, and she would need to be at her best to be of any use. In her chamber's wardrobe, she traced a hand over the exquisite dress gifted to her by her lord. It reminded her of the garbs worn in her homeland while being distinct enough to stand apart. Along with the dress, an ornate golden scepter rested at the side, two intricate wolf heads spiraling from the handle. Taking it in hand, she once again marveled at how the divine artifact filled her with power. It was like her lord's holy light flowed through her veins, eagerly awaiting her command. Getting ready to wear the fine dress, she paused, hearing a small pop at her side. It was one of her lord's servants. Yaling had been surprised after seeing the small, magical beings. She'd heard tales of similar creatures called woodwalkers growing up as a child, but she'd never expected to come face to face with them one day. My lady, please, allow me, the soft voice of the elf spoke. Honestly, she was still getting accustomed to being waited on, hand and foot. Still, she knew the little elves would insist, even if she wanted to dress herself, so she simply nodded, her nightclothes falling to the ground before the golden robes came to life, snugly fitting themselves onto her body. She let out a gasp. It was the first time wearing the gifted dress, and it felt like she was wrapped in the comforting and protective embrace of her lord. She instinctively knew that no harm would befall her, not when her lord could look after her at all times. A happy tear fell from her eye. She'd still been somewhat apprehensive about leaving her new home. Yaling trusted her lord with all her heart, but there was still the faintest fear that she could end up in chains once again. Now those doubts were gone, she could fulfill her task without fear. My lady, it is time, the little elf told her, holding out one of her dainty hands and knocking Yaling out of her reverie. Twisting through space, Yaling found herself standing on the Black Lake's docks behind her lord's castle. Despite the howling winter winds that could be seen off in the distance, the castle's surroundings consistently stayed at a comfortable temperature. Of course, while wearing her divine raiments, no climate would be a bother. Seeing her lord standing at the end of the dock, next to one of the grand ships she'd been shown before, Yaling hurried over, bowing with a smile on her pretty face. My lord, I'm ready to fulfill my duty, she declared. Feeling her lord's firm hand urging her to rise, she looked up, blushing at the handsome face smiling down at her. Her lord nodded. Indeed, I have no doubt that you'll fulfill this mission, he said, running his hand through her onyx tresses, making her pale face turn beet red. Before Yaling could lower her head and stammer out a reply, her lord firmly held her face with both hands, leaning down to place his lips on her forehead. She almost passed out from that, but the golden radiance surrounding her form was distracting enough that she was able to stand strong. Now go, my first saintess. Spread my light across this desolate world, her lord told her, and she could only nod in a daze as she was led to the deck of the large ship. His saintess. Was she worthy? No, her lord couldn't make a mistake. She wouldn't disappoint her god. Still, she was so shocked that she barely paid attention to the black-robed men and women bowing and leading her to the ship's interior. A new god's conquest. After exchanging the dark and damp cell for the most luxurious room she had ever seen, Val's time spent in the Kneeler's castle was interesting, to say the least. Her first shock was the oddly dressed servants that she could only assume were the fabled children of the forest. Sure, they looked different from the stories she had heard, but what else could they be? Even with that surprise, she figured her days would be filled with boredom. Instead, in one corner of her room, she had found the walls lined with many similarly shaped objects she had never seen before. Now, of course, she knew them to be books, something she had vaguely heard mentioned by her mother. She had flipped through the pages out of pure curiosity, not expecting to get anything out of the many pages of strange inscriptions. To her surprise, the information contained within entered her mind akin to a person speaking. With not much else to keep her mind off things, she had spent the majority of her time with her head in the books. Until now, she had never realized how limited her perspective had been. As one of the interesting fantasies she had read would say, she was like a frog at the bottom of a well. If she could bring back the knowledge she had already learned to her village, she had no doubt she could improve the lives of her people. She just needed to figure out a way to escape. It wouldn't be an easy task. The children acting as servants always seemed to know when she was up to something. Her only chance might be tricking the lord of this castle. He seemed laid back and unbothered about most things. Maybe she could catch him off guard. Val decided to forget about that for the moment. It was time for her scheduled bath that, to her shame, had become one of the things she looked forward to the most each day. After all, she had never been able to have such a luxury, not when getting soaked meant certain death beyond the wall. Leaf, I'm ready for my bath, she called out to thin air, the small girl along with a large copper basin popping into the center of the room. Getting a name out of the little thing had been like pulling teeth. For days, Leaf would ignore anything besides a request for service. Val liked to think that the child had warmed up to her over the days, finally exchanging a few short words every now and then. Thank you, Leaf, she smiled, dropping her robes before stepping into the warm water. Val sighed, filled with contentment as she rested back against the tub, the little servant working freshly scented soap into her long, flowing hair. She couldn't deny that she would miss this once she ended up escaping back to her village. I'll leave you to soak, my lady, Leaf said, leaving her alone after she had been cleaned up and the dirty bathwater was replaced with a wave of the servant's tiny, four-fingered hand. Now alone, Val looked side to side, making sure she was alone before one of her hands drifted below the water. A guilty pleasure of hers had been reading the few romance-filled novels where a strong and handsome lord fell for a beautiful commoner. As she stroked her folds, thinking of herself in that situation, Val couldn't stop the quiet moans from leaving her mouth. Unfortunately, before she could finish, she froze upon hearing her quarters door click open. Val panicked. No one had entered her room through the door this entire time. She could only assume it was her captor finally making his wicked move. Oh, please, don't mind me. Feel free to continue with the show, the contemptible voice mocked her, making her shoot out of the tub, reaching for the nearby towel to cover herself with. Val scowled, seeing her captor casually leaning against the wall while smiling at her. Well, so be it. It would be his funeral for underestimating her. The man was a fool for leaving her in a room filled with so many things that could be used as weapons. Finally, she decided to rush for the fire poker nearby. Before she had started reading her books, she didn't even know what a fire poker was, but what she did know was that it made for a great whacking stick. Val readied herself. Even with her viewpoint drastically changed from all the knowledge she had consumed, she was still of the free folk and wouldn't give herself to this extremely handsome man without a fight. The man pushed himself off the wall and before he could make more than 3 steps, Val went in with a lunge, aiming center mass. It was no use, though. Her captor easily caught her attack, holding her weapon in place, and she didn't have nearly enough strength to break his grasp. Locked in place, the first thing she noticed was that she had to tilt her head up just the slightest to meet the man's eyes. It hadn't been that long, had it? Had he grown? And the second thing were those mesmerizing black and gold eyes that seemed like they could peer into her very being. Seemingly done playing games, the fucker tore her weapon out of her hand before lifting her up underneath her arms like she was nothing more than a child. Oof, she grunted after the bastard tossed her across the room and onto her bed, her towel flying free and her large breasts bouncing all over the place. Val was still stunned from the rough landing, but she was at least able to send out a kick, aiming for his manhood as her captor climbed onto her bed. Again, it did nothing except give him her leg to hold onto. Still, she continued sending out attacks that were all blocked or did nothing to his overly strong body. You're a fierce one. I'm going to enjoy making you mine, he growled into her ear as she lay there panting from the exertion. Like hell, I'll ever be yours, she told him between each breath, making him grin at her. With a snap, his fine clothes disappeared, and she could feel what she assumed to be his large manhood flop menacingly onto her belly. Even while exhausted, she wouldn't give up so easily. She sent out another punch at that pretty nose of his, only for her hand to be caught as she was manhandled onto her stomach. Both hands trapped in his grip behind her back, her legs pinned beneath her captor, she let out a grunt of frustration. As his firm hands roamed her supple skin, her disobedient body couldn't help but react to the touch, especially when she was pulled against his strong chest, one of his fingers gently brushing her pink nipple. Val did her best to wiggle out of his devious grip, but it was no use, and she was forced to allow his hands to roam all over her graceful curves. Bastard, what do you think you're doing? Val gasped as her captor traced his soft lips from the base of her neck down to her tailbone. Not receiving an answer, she could only squirm as her body reacted to the sensations, the uncontrollable dampness growing between her legs. Finally, though, it seemed her insidious captor was going to eat her up completely, something big and hard knocking on the entrance of her virgin slit. He leaned over, sucking on the soft flesh of her neck. Well, what will it be, my darling? Prosperity for your people, or their inevitable extinction? He asked, nipping at her sensitive earlobes. Her pride wouldn't allow her to answer, but as she moved her rear back against his bulbous tip, that was enough to get her point across. Really, it would be naive of her to deny him. She'd never heard of a sorcerer with as much power as the one about to claim her as his wife. She was positive that her sacrifice would be worth it for her mother and fellow free folk. Well, that was the story she'd be sticking to, at the very least, she thought. But all those thoughts were forgotten for the moment as her now husband slowly inched into her sopping hole, making her moan in rapture along with his sexy groans. She could feel her tightness firmly wrapping around the invading shaft. She didn't have a hymen to break. It had long since broken while training with her mother, but this was still the first time having anything larger than a finger entering her. As her husband increased his speed, Val couldn't help but wonder if she should have shaved her hair down there, as those in her stories would. She'd been given a magical ointment to remove hair that she used under her arms and on her legs, but she felt going bare down below was a little too scandalous. But as his hand wrapped around her waist, his fingers combing through her front bush before playing with her sensitive nub, all while continuing his deep thrusts, she figured he didn't mind one bit. And as she squealed, feeling his other hand tease her crinkled hole, she was sure he was fine with her natural style. After all, the mirror in her room was the first one she'd seen in her life. Of course, she'd checked herself out in it, so she knew she had more than a couple of wisps of blonde hair between her cheeks. Either way, she could feel her husband was enjoying her body, his groans and growls increasing as he had his way with her seductive form. She'd seen the way men from her village eyed her up when her mother wasn't around, so she didn't doubt that her husband would be satisfied with her body. The problem, though, was that she'd already been exhausted from putting up a fight in the beginning, and now she was reaching her limit. Luckily, Val felt the thrust speed up, and with a few more pumps, she felt the invading phallus twitch, the sensation of being filled to the brim sending her into her own climax as well. She could only lay there in a daze as she heard the squelch of the manhood pulling out of her body. It seemed her husband decided to take pity on her poor self, gathering her limp form into his arms as he moved her into a more comfortable position with her head resting on his chest. Husband, will you really help my people? She couldn't help but wonder if he'd been telling the truth. Oh, so it's husband now. He chuckled. Of course, my love, I'm nothing if not a man of my word, he promised, stroking her back as she drifted off to sleep. A new god's conquest. Rose furiously pored over the many books stacked high on her desk. Just the other night, she had seen Lux going into the room of that captured savage. She wasn't dumb. She could guess what was going on in there, and she was done being overlooked. Sure, she and Lux still had their daily banter, but she wanted more. At least that was something she could console herself with. Everyone else who interacted with Lux treated him like the god he claimed to be. Rose chuckled at that. He really had them all fooled. But that didn't mean she was content sitting on the sidelines, watching the man she loved stick his dick in every skank who passed by. No, she wanted that dick in H. Ahem, what she meant to say is that she's simply looking out for Lux's best interests. Yes, that's right, who knows what all these filthy trollops are up to. And that's why she's sitting here, isolated in the castle's library. If he's not going to take her up on her advances, she'll just have to entice him another way. She figured Lux was interested in Bellatrix for her magical prowess, so if she became a strong witch too, he'd have to take notice. At first, though, she was a little apprehensive about the whole thing. You see, most of the magic within the library is what would be considered dark. However, she quickly got over that. After all, what had following Professor McGonagall's or Headmaster Dumbledore's instructions ever gotten her? Near death every year, that's what. So, as she pushed herself away from the desk, she wouldn't hesitate to gain the strength she needed. What is he in here for? Rose asked the spooky undead guard after making her way to the dungeon. He tried to force himself on a young girl, my lady, the raspy, lifeless voice answered, making her nod. Open the cell, Rose commanded. The guard held open the gate as she walked into the dirty cell, looking at the ugly man chained against the wall. She wouldn't hesitate. Aeternum tormentum, she intoned, pointing her wand. The intoxicating dark magic flowed through her body, making her shudder, almost distracting her from properly completing the curse. She didn't falter, though, determined to see some progress, and as the contemptible creature writhed around in agony, she smiled. Rose left the cell, leaving the man to suffer with the new curse she'd just learned. Maybe she'd put him out of his misery when she needed to test something else. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. Or just Google, Patreon CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D. 7 comments 0 vote. Bravos. Lux relaxed on a couch in his castle's solar, watching his daughter happily play with Nor on the floor. Bella was likely off kicking puppies or something, while Val was enjoying the library's considerable selection now that she wasn't confined to her quarters. His beautiful saintess should be arriving at the first free city of her mission. Her main purpose there would be to set up surveillance and protection on the exiled Targaryens, with making contact with the Iron Bank in his name as a secondary objective. Daenerys and Viserys would be important pieces in the game he was setting up. Lux didn't want any nonsensical butterfly effect, like how Val ended up captured by slavers, to mess with his plans. Placing a few of his trained wizards to keep an eye on them would be enough. After all, he only needed them to be alive to get what he wanted from them. Other than the two royals, he was sure the Iron Bank would want to make contact after seeing the goods he'd sent along with his saintess. The magicals that he tasked Bella with training couldn't create permanent conjurations like him, even after learning the advanced transfiguration he'd made, but what they could do was create superior products from inferior materials. With that, he'd put them to work when they weren't learning. From fine glassware and intricate jewelry that couldn't possibly be created with the world's current level of technology to alcohol-based perfumes that put this world's scented oils to shame, he now had a steady supply of luxurious goods to flood the market with. And that was only what he'd sent with his saintess. On the other flying ships, he packed them to the brim with the surplus foods that his pocket dimension farms produced, sending them to various cities of Essos and Westeros. He was sure the unheard of potatoes and tomatoes would be a hit with the peasants of this world. For Narnia, Delphi cried, seated on the back of the little black wolf, raising her tiny wooden sword to the sky. Nor took off, charging toward her father lost in his daydreams, and Delphi struck, aiming for her father's shin with all the might her little arms could muster. Ah, you little shit, Lux cursed, shaking his head. Fucking kids, don't they know not to interrupt a man while he's internally monologuing? Little shit, little shit, little shit, his daughter merrily skipped around singing. Ah, hells, Bella was going to give him dirty side eyes for a while because of this. A new god's conquest. Yaling leaned against the upper deck's railing, wind flowing through her raven black hair as the ship cut through the calm waves, nearing their journey's first stop. Their first leg of the voyage had them soaring through the skies, but now that the iconic Titan of Bravos could just barely be seen, they were pretending to be nothing more than an impressive yet mundane trading vessel. Yaling knew they'd still get more than a few interested gazes because of the ship's size and advanced design, but something like this wasn't completely unheard of. The swan ships of the Summer Islanders, while smaller, somewhat resembled their own. Seeing that they'd soon be making port at the bustling trade city, Yaling pushed herself off of the ship's railing, turning to one of her lord's black-robed sorcerers. Please, gather your fellows on the main deck, she politely ordered, receiving a nod of acknowledgement. While it was true that they were now under her command, in the end, they all served for the good of their lord. Down on the main deck, Yaling looked over the 20 men and women standing at attention. For now, she'd only be addressing the mages under her command while the commoners working as laborers were in the ship's hold, preparing the supplies for transport. As you all know, I have been tasked with fulfilling our Lord's commands in this foreign land. At all times, half of you will guard the ship, ensuring none realize it is something more than all the other vessels in port, and while I'm in the city, the other half will act as my guards to keep up appearances. Yaling paused, giving time for any questions or concerns to be raised. Hearing none, she continued, that will be all for the time. You may organize yourselves to complete your duties as you see fit. Yes, saintess, they all saluted after her commands had been given. Yaling watched as the group huddled up, exchanging a few words before all drew their wands, the black robes they wore transfiguring into black combat leathers, each with a sword at the waist, and finally, a glamour that changed their physical features to one closer to her own. She nodded to herself. It would be extremely odd if her guards were seen as defenseless scholars. Of course, it was far from the truth, but she wasn't going to flaunt their magical capabilities when it wasn't needed. She knew that, even without magic, each of the mages could hold their own with a blade. And with them all seemingly of Yetish descent, they'd likely face far less scrutiny. It didn't take long before their ship was passing under the legs of the mighty Titan, the horn blowing at their arrival, and the sprawling city coming into view. Of course, it wasn't a new sight for Yaling. She'd visited most of the major cities between Yeti and the Narrow Sea during her time as a bed slave. The bastard daughter of Valyria claimed they welcomed all but slavers. Of course, as long as one paid the right people and wasn't blatant about it, a slave vessel like the one she'd been a part of could go unnoticed in the sea of traders. They waited for permission to moor, and after being flagged toward a vacant spot by a small galley, the crew prepared for landing. With how many enchantments their ship was packed full of, they easily drifted into the tight spot without a hitch. As she'd expected, it seemed their grandiose galleon flying gold and silver banners had drawn considerable attention, a well-dressed man backed by a squad of guards already waiting where the gangplank had been dropped. Yaling recognized the badge the man in front wore as that of a port official. She could see the greed in his eyes and she smiled. It seemed the first lambs were already walking to their slaughter, she thought. Seeing no reason to delay things, Yaling signaled for the mages who took the role of her guards to surround her as they debarked their vessel. My lady, welcome. My name is Malello. May I know the nature of your visit to our fine city? The official asked, making Yaling nearly roll her eyes at the performance the man was playing at. Business and trade, she replied, not bothering to go along with the act. Very well then, I'll begin my inspections to ensure proper taxes and port fees are in order. Malello's friendly smile vanished, seeing he wasn't fooling anyone. This, however, put a smile on Yaling's pretty face. It wasn't a nice smile, but it seemed that Malello's survival instincts weren't sensitive enough to notice. Yaling happily led Malello and his few guards onto the ship and into the hold. When the doors closed, they didn't even get the chance to realize the interior's obviously magical nature before a glowing wand tip was pointed at the back of each Bravosi's head, their minds no longer their own for the moment. Well done, she clapped. Make sure they believe we paid more than the standard fare and that, aside from our wealth, there's nothing suspicious about us. It didn't take the skilled sorcerers long to follow her commands, and the rest of the time was spent standing around because it would be suspicious if the inspection finished too soon. Well met, my lady. Here are your documents, and I hope your business ventures are fruitful. Malello happily bowed, now off the ship. Yaling raised an eyebrow. She could tell the man was being honest this time. Looking at the sorceress that messed with the man's mind, she only saw her looking away, trying to act innocent. Yaling guessed the woman hadn't liked what she'd seen while going through Malello's memories. She shrugged, whatever, it's not like the man was of any importance. He'd just have to live with the extra brain damage that the tampering would cause. Since that was dealt with, they could finally get started on the important things. You two, we need to find the exiled Targaryens. Supposedly they're living in a house with a red door, she ordered, picking out the one she was told had a gift for divination. The two vanished into the crowd, and Yaling turned to give a few more orders, preparing to set up a few stalls in the nearby market. She was sure her next move would draw the eyes of the Iron Bank onto their little group, but that was what she was hoping for. From her days as a princess, Yaling knew that, unless you wanted to be looked down upon and taken advantage of, you had to make these kinds of people come to you, not the other way around. A new god's conquest. Tycho Nestoris, glorified parchment pusher of the illustrious Iron Bank, flipped through the information his informants had delivered, making sure everything was in order one last time before scurrying down the extensive marble halls. What he'd heard couldn't be put off, and if his boss learned of it late, it would be on his head. Knocking on the large door, Tycho patiently waited for permission to enter. Enter, he heard the muffled voice call out from inside. He heaved the heavy thing open before walking in and bowing at the waist. Tycho, this better be good. I'm putting my meeting with the Black Pearl on hold for this, Bessaro Rayon, his boss and key holder for the Iron Bank, grumbled. Yes, Lord Rayon, this is of the utmost importance. He tried to placate the large man sitting in a double-wide seat. The Black Pearl would probably be thanking him if she knew, Tycho thought, trying to keep his lip from twitching up. Bessaro seemed to relax at those words, deflating back into that poor chair of his, the creaking wood echoing through the chambers. Fine, let me have it then, Bessaro waved him over. Tycho placed the bundle of parchments on the desk. My lord, a powerful sorceress from Yt trading goods of such fine quality I've never heard of before has set up shop in the port market, he explained, seeing a frown starting to form on his boss's mouth. He internally sighed. He knew this all sounded like a bunch of balderdash, but he could trust his sources. My lord, I trust this information with my life, he tried persuading, seeing his boss's frown deepen while flipping through the pages. Bessaro sighed. Very well, I'll remember those words. He sighed again, this time deeper. Seems I won't be seeing my pearl tonight, after all. Tycho turned away, hiding his eye that was visibly twitching. Did you at least acquire anything this so-called sorceress was selling? His boss asked, making him nod. Yes, my lord, the men I sent should be returning soon. Good. Bring them to the keyholder chambers when they arrive, Bessaro said, struggling to hoist himself out of his seat. Oh, and do remember, Tycho, if this turns out to be a waste of my time, you won't enjoy the outcome, his boss promised, making him give a stiff nod. A new god's conquest. Sitting in the keyholder's chambers, Bessaro frowned, flipping through the information his lackey had brought to his attention. If even a quarter of it was true, he was sure there was a hefty profit to be made. Watching his fellow keyholders trickle in, he gave each a nod before getting back to the pieces of parchment. Seriously, a saintess healing all illness and injury. Of course, he was already accustomed to the many religions of the city claiming to do the same, such as the Red Priests and their ability to raise the recently deceased, but everyone knew that was nonsense. Bessaro, my friend, what's this all about? A keyholder asked, making him frown. The man asking was an upstart that he knew only made it onto the council after a lucky break. Read for yourself, he said, sliding one of the parchments down the table. The man tilted his head. A priestess of the Lord of Light healing the ill and injured. What's so special about that? These mummeries of the Red Temple are nothing new. No, not the Red God. Apparently, this is another Lord of Light, and based on the priestess, the religion is likely a new one from Yt, Bessaro explained, one of the older keyholders perking up at his words. Perhaps this Lord of Light has something to do with the vaunted maid of light they worship in Yt, the white-bearded elder chimed in. As interesting as this is, what does any of this have to do with the Iron Bank? The upstart asked, making a good point for once. You're right. If it were the sorcery alone, this wouldn't concern us. Bessaro paused, tossing over a few more parchments to the others. It's the riches they've brought alone that we need to discuss. The old man hummed, do we have more than just these words as proof? He asked. Bessaro nodded, one of my subordinates will soon be delivering samples. We're still waiting on a few members of this council anyways. The members present nodded at his words, willing to wait for what could be a profitable opportunity. Luckily, it didn't take long for all the keyholders to assemble, and shortly after a knock on the doors could be heard, his lackey entering along with 4 guards, each carrying a chest. Well, let's see it then. The upstart rubbed his hands together, standing up and opening the first chest. Bessaro noticed the man frozen in apparent shock, hovering over the open chest. He rolled his eyes. Enough with the pageantry, get on with it, he thought. Incredible, he exclaimed, slowly raising an elegant crystal chalice. Bessaro narrowed his eyes, he'd never seen such fine and clear glassware. He wondered if its durability would hold up. Likely thinking the same, the upstart grabbed another of the cups, far from lightly clinking them together with no chips or cracks coming from the test, answering his unspoken question. If this is mass-producible, we can lower our imports from the slaver city, the upstart said, smiling widely. Bessaro wondered if it was an act. He knew for sure that most of those present didn't at all care about the plights of slavery. They made plenty of coin dealing with them, and if keeping slavery out of Bravos wasn't so profitable, who knows what Bravos would look like today. Bessaro signaled his lackey, watching the thin man struggle to heft the chest and place it in front of him. After all, he'd already stood from his chair one too many times today. He picked out a strange cube with a hinge and, after opening it up, he frowned at the circle with an arrow, looking at Tycho for answers. My lord, it is called a compass, supposedly it will always point north, his lackey explained, making him nearly drop the device in shock. His hands trembled, and despite the effort, Bessaro hefted himself out of his seat once again, walking throughout the room, testing the device. This changes everything, he declared, gaining the attention of the others who were still gushing over the glassware. Tycho, show them, he ordered his man. After more of the devices had been passed around and explained, he was pleased to see them all coming to the same realization. No longer would their ships sail blind when the stars or sun couldn't be seen. Gone were the days of being lost at sea, and he could only imagine how this would speed up their trade voyages. I think I speak for all when I say that we need to meet the person behind this priestess, he told the room, seeing no one disagree with his words. Tycho, what do you know about the ones this priestess serves? He demanded. Nothing, my lord. She claims she serves none but her god, Tycho replied, making him roll his eyes. Fine, if that's the case, we must meet with this so-called saintess. Agreed, but we should send for her on the morrow. For now, we should plan what we'll be offering, the white-bearded keyholder suggested. All right, let's get down to brass tacks then, he said, beginning the long and boring deliberations. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link, patreon.com/CodeKingu. Or just Google, Patreon CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGBP2Q8XPK4D. 6 comments 0 vote. Negotiations. Yaling gave the kneeling woman at her feet a compassionate smile before holding her scepter to her chest, requesting her lord's divine light to heal the poor woman. Her plea was immediately answered as a golden light descended onto the woman. The woman had been a prostitute in one of the city's less than reputable establishments until catching an illness that had her flesh slowly rotting away. But as the light subsided, the wide-eyed woman stretched her now pristine arms out, finally relieved from the pain after what felt like years of living as an untouchable. May the Lord's everlasting light shine upon your life and his eternal darkness welcome you into its comforting embrace once your time on this mortal plane inevitably comes to an end, Yaling recited, making sure the healed woman and the crowd watching knew who to thank. Praise the Lord, hail his benevolence. We are not worthy. The people chanted, making Yaling nod in approval. This wasn't the first time she'd healed the disenfranchised of this city, so it wasn't a shock to the gathering crowd. Move aside, make way. A group of uniformly armed men parted the growing congregation. They, of course, didn't take kindly to that, but after recognizing the men as guards of the Iron Bank, even if they were outraged that the miracles being performed were put on hold, they didn't dare act or even speak on their inclinations. Stepping out from the formation of guards, Yaling looked at the tall and gaunt man who gave a slight bow. My lady, I am Tycho Nestoris. On behalf of the keyholders of the Iron Bank, I invite you to discuss matters of great importance, he said. Yaling faked a frown. Good sir, the only matters of great importance are the sacred words of my lord that I've been tasked to spread. She wanted to make the man squirm, and squirm he did, trying his best to come up with the best response that wouldn't come off as offensive. Yaling found it delightful to watch the man who thought he was of any importance flounder under her gaze, and to her delight, she felt that her lord watching over her found the situation amusing. Oh, of course, my lady, I meant no offense, he bowed again. But if you are willing to spend some of your valued time speaking with the keyholders, I guarantee it will be worth it. Yaling waited there, just staring at the man for a while to set his nerves on edge. Very well, let's not keep them waiting then, she gestured for him to lead the way. Tycho looked around nervously. It seemed he just now noticed her black-clad warriors surrounding his little group. Will your friends be joining us? He squeaked. Yaling nodded. Yes, they are duty-bound to protect their saintess at all times, she told the banker, his brow starting to sweat. All right then, I wouldn't want to get in the way of these fine men and women's duty, now would I, he tittered. The journey through the city was a quiet one, and after reaching the grand doors of the Iron Bank, their guide looked at her, clearly more nervous than before. My lady, the bank has a rule about weapons you see, he trailed off. Yaling gave him a small smile for all the emotional turmoil she'd put the poor man through. As long as they are allowed at my side, they don't mind handing over their weapons, she offered, making the man sigh in relief. With her guards now mistakenly defenseless, the banker paused mid-turn, glancing at her divine scepter. It seemed he decided better of himself, leading the way through the bank without saying a word. It was true that the thing looked like it could easily bash a man's skull open, but she was a saintess, she wouldn't act on such violence, right? Entering the meeting room, Yaling met the eyes of the men who would take everything from her and, more importantly, her lord, down to the last copper if they had it their way. The room was obviously designed to make their guests feel like they were at a disadvantage. The half-moon-shaped table the keyholders sat at noticeably higher than the seat she was directed to. Yaling didn't let it get to her, sitting tall in the lowered seat, her guards lined up behind her, and her lord watching over her. And when they gave her the silent treatment, trying to put her on edge, she simply sat there, serene as always until an older gentleman finally cleared his throat. Welcome, priestess, I hope you've enjoyed the old man started speaking before being interrupted. I am the anointed saintess of my lord, Yaling cut in, making the keyholder's eye twitch at the disrespect he wasn't at all used to. Ahem, saintess, then. As I was saying, I hope you've enjoyed your stay in our fair city, he continued, his smile noticeably stiffer than before. Yaling hummed. I can't complain, the locals have been receptive enough of my lord's grace. The old man who seemed to be the one chosen to carry out the platitudes perked up. Indeed, but we've only heard whispers of your lord, care to enlighten us? Of course, good sir, Yaling smiled. My Lord and Savior, Lux Tenebris, God of everlasting light and eternal darkness welcomes all under his divine aegis, she proclaimed, a noticeable golden aura wafting off of her form, making those in the room tense at what they assumed to be sorcery or witchcraft. The old man adjusted his collar. Right, and may I ask who provided you with the fine products we've been hearing so much about? My lord provides all, Yaling succinctly replied. Your lord, as in, the banker raised an eyebrow. Yes, that's right, my lord, Lux Tenebris, provides for all, she agreed. Okay, then who is responsible for crafting the items? He asked, and Yaling could hear the patience in his voice running out. That would be the students of my lord, she said, making the man let out a sigh. Is there any way we can get in contact with whoever is in charge of your lord's students? He asked. Well, my lord's mistress is usually the one giving orders, so maybe she could help you with that. The old man ran a hand down his face, and Yaling could see the rest of the keyholders each exacerbated in their own right. Your lord's mistress? He asked. Yes, she didn't elaborate. Quote. If I may barge into this riveting conversation for a moment, to begin with, my name is Bessaro Rayon, you may call me Bessaro. Is there anything we could do to have you arrange a meeting between the Iron Bank and someone in charge of supplying the products you've been selling? Bessaro finally decided to get the conversation moving in a more productive direction. Yaling shrugged. One moment, I'll ask, she said, placing her hands together and looking at the ceiling. Before the keyholders could raise their questions, the familiar golden light surrounded the saintess's body. My lord has agreed, but he has some conditions, Yaling told them. You just spoke to your lord? Bessaro asked. Indeed. Bessaro wondered if this would go anywhere, but they were already this deep in, might as well hear the saintess out. By all means then, let us hear these conditions, he said, trying not to roll his eyes. My lord asks for your assistance in procuring property, with one being an adequate location for a temple. Of course, we will gladly pay, but he finds it distasteful for his saintess to sift through the many disreputable landowners of this city. If that is acceptable, my lord will send a trade envoy within a moon's time, she said, making him frown in thought. This would be easily arranged, but something seemed off. What was being asked of them was so little that it set him on edge. Bessaro looked around at the other keyholders, seeing them all give a slight nod. That is something that could be arranged. Now, we do have one more proposition if you're willing to hear it, he paused before seeing the saintess nod. We'd ask you to exclusively sell the things you call compasses to the Iron Bank. Once again, the saintess placed her hands together and the golden light shone. My lord says that this will cost you significantly more, she said. Bessaro nodded. He would find it suspicious if this lord didn't know how valuable the creation was. Let us hear it, he urged. My lord believes that the other free cities won't be as welcoming to his temples as Bravos is and requests your connections for this purpose. Bessaro thought about it. This would require significantly more resources than their first demand. He shook his head. It was still nothing compared to the value having a monopoly over the compass would yield. He looked to his fellows once more and none raised a concern. Bessaro smiled. This will cost us a lot, and the Iron Bank may irritate longtime allies, but I do think it will be worth it in the end, he told the saintess, playing up how much they were losing. Very good, I will stay in contact then, the saintess said, standing from her seat and leaving the chambers with her black armored guards following behind. Bessaro was lost for words. When was the last time he and his fellow keyholders had been treated with such a lack of respect and indifference? Another member cleared his throat. Did we just make a deal with a mad woman? He asked. Bessaro shrugged. It couldn't be helped, not when so much is at stake. The compass will ensure our dominion over the seas, he said. A new god's conquest. Lux chuckled while looking through his saintess's eyes. The jade beauty was playing with the high and mighty iron bankers like they were nothing more than mere toys. He knew that the city built around sea trade would go crazy over the compasses that he decided to bring into the world. Lux stood, Aurora hopping off his lap. Bella was spending time with their daughter, and Val was on a hunt, so he might as well entertain himself for the time. Spreading his senses through the castle, he locked onto his two targets. Appearing in a silent flash, Lux grabbed the first, and before they could even react, he was already behind the second, and with a final third flash, he was at the foot of his mattress, a startled elf over each shoulder. He tossed them on the mattress, and they squealed. Lux was eyeing the two up like the enticing little treats they were, and they noticed, one looking too shy and innocent to touch while the others, fuck me eyes were apparent. Of course, the first acting all shy was Leaf, the little cutie whose virginity he'd stolen, and the other was a far older elf named Ash, who, unlike Leaf, ended up gaining a delectable dark complexion with white hair after her bonding. Master, you know you don't need to be forceful with me. I'll gladly take care of your needs anytime, Ash teased, already starting to peel off the cute French-made uniform. My lord, use me however you see fit, Leaf stammered, hiding her face behind her hands, not wanting to lose to her older kin. And like always, the elf's innocence had him wanting nothing more than to devour the little thing. Lux vanished his clothes. The impatient dark elf, already naked and waiting at the edge of the bed, gently took his hardening cock in one hand while the other fondled his hefty sack. Don't be shy, Leaf, Lux held a hand out for the shy elf to take. Almost like she was still a virgin, Leaf let out a cute squeak as he pulled the girl into his arms, running a hand through her vibrant, autumn-colored hair before leaning down to meet her sweet mouth with his own. As he feasted on her soft lips, Lux got to work unfastening the overly complex dress, easily sliding it down the elf's slender form after figuring out the contraption. Lux grabbed Leaf's hands. She was about to shyly cover up her budding breasts topped with light pink nipples, and he couldn't have that. My dear, your body's a work of art. Don't try to hide it from your lord, now, he teased, Leaf's blush reaching the tips of her pointy ears. As he played with the shy girl above, Lux shivered in pleasure, the little succubus below lapping at his cock and balls. Groaning in pleasure, Lux's hand trailed down Leaf's soft stomach, reaching the little nub above the hairless pink slit. My lord, Leaf whimpered, his divine fingers too much for the small elf. Just take deep breaths and don't try to stop those moans, he whispered into her ear, the pointy things twitching as his warm breath tickled them. The words seemed to help as she began meeting his gentle strokes with her tight slit. Leaf was starting to turn to putty in his arms. Lux felt the pleasurable sensations below his waist stop. Master, you've been ignoring me, Ash whined. Please, fuck your servant's little pussy, she begged, raising her bubble butt in the air while arching her dainty back. Really, who was he to decline his loyal servant's earnest request? Lux watched in amusement as the shy little elf tried to follow his hand as he positioned himself behind the needy, chocolate cunt. Maybe Leaf was starting to come out of her shell, or maybe she was just too far lost in her lust. Either way, the little cutie wouldn't let the hand toying with her dripping sex go, not even as he used his other hand to press his tip against the spread-open pussy in front of him. Yes, yes, harder, fuck me harder, master, Ash cried as his cock completely disappeared into the tight hole with each thrust becoming rougher and rougher. It was a good thing that the little elves were built a lot sturdier than they looked. Lux looked over to the side, his eyes meeting with the guiltily pleading look that Leaf was sending him. The girl was too shy to say it, but he knew that she couldn't stand being left out. Leaf let out an indignant huff after he easily tossed her little ass on top of the elf he was already balls deep into. Sending a final hard thrust into the chocolate elf, Lux gave her his special cream filling, the elf almost incoherent with how many orgasms she'd had in succession. Lux didn't need a break. He could go all day, so that meant the shy elf lying on top of the fucked silly one didn't have to wait. He gently teased the dripping slit before slowly piercing the elf to her core. Lux knew that Leaf preferred it slow and gentle, and since she was such an obedient servant, he'd make sure she enjoyed herself while serving. Lux leaned over the small form, tilting her pretty head to the side and catching those lovely lips of hers, their bodies molding to each other as he slowly worked himself in and out of the tight slit. By the time their gentle fucking led to a simultaneous climax, the wild little elf underneath them was already kicking and raring to go. Lux's nighttime fun wouldn't be ending anytime soon. A new god's conquest. Watching Rose furiously taking notes from her perch atop a bookshelf, Aurora huffed. Her pops really was a baddie, showing the poor girl just enough affection to keep her hooked, while ignoring her to the point she was willing to go to these lengths for more. She'd need to keep a careful eye on things. She couldn't let her father go too far. Read ahead on my Patreon. Link. patreon.com/CodeKingu. Or just Google, Patreon CodeKingu. Join my Discord. Discord. GGVP2Q8XPK4D.